When Jeff downsized his bin, he expected to save a bit of money. How wrong he was. Instead, the retiree copped a massive rates bill, overcharged thousands of dollars the council now won't pay back.
You're looking at Australia's most expensive garbage bin. Jeff, how much does this bin cost you?
Over $8,000.
It's a lovely bin, but I'm not sure it's worth that much.
I don't think it's worth that much either.
Here's a bin bungle that you may be caught up in, and you're totally unaware. Jeff Appert had a big 240-litre general waste bin, but wanted to downsize to the smaller 140-litre, so council duly took the big one away.
Our daughters moved out and obviously the bigger bin wasn't needed anymore, so we decided to downsize and went to the smaller bin, going half the size.
Save some money.
Oh, save a lot of money, we thought.
You thought?
Yeah.
Well, they did save money on the downgraded bin size, but the change unearthed a discrepancy.
Brady, what we've basically calculated since back in 2011 to 2022, our bin cost should have been $8,305.15, but we've actually paid $16,610.
$16,610 to have your bins emptied?
Yes, we've paid double.
How did you not know that?
Well, I think like everything, we pay the rates like everyone else every year. We've been paying them for 34 years and never queried the rate costs.
It all came down to bureaucratic language.
But we didn't know that's a quantity of two.
Oh, rateable
It's just as
value.
rateable value. So to us, we assumed the rateable value was for the larger bin.
Well, the larger bin was twice the size.
That should be quantity.
Quantity of bins, not rateable value.
No.
Again, Jeff and wife Kim assumed twice the size, hence the two. If it just said the number of bins, they would have picked it up, they claim.
We assumed two was for the larger size bin, one was for the smaller size bin.
At the end of the day, they'd been paying for two large bins and didn't know it. Their council, Kiama, south of Sydney, confirmed in a letter they were incorrectly charging for two large bins, but wasn't giving all the money back.
They've refunded us for the current year that we're in and the last year, so that's 2 years. And they said that's all they can go back is only 2 years because of a tax act that council implied.
I think it's very unfair. It's just not right.
They took our money for a service that we never received, yet we've paid for it, but never got it. But yet they've got our money for it.
And they won't give it back?
They won't give it back.
Doesn't pass the pub test, does it?
I don't think so. I think there's a bit of moral ethics here, and I think, at the end of the day, council need to do the right thing.
So we went off to Kiama Council, who told us in a statement, Kiama Council provides an award-winning waste service to residents and ratepayers across our municipality. Try telling that to these two. Anyway, Council did say, we are sorry that this regrettable situation has arisen and that the error in the customer's bin service was not picked up earlier. The Office of Local Government has advised that where charges go back more than 1 year, the Recovery of Imposts Tax Act 1963 applies. Bureaucratic speak, but in simple terms, they won't be giving the money back. But they did say they are going to do an audit on all council bins to see if they're correct. That doesn't help these two.
We're not happy at all.
If you've been caught out, I wonder how many other people around Australia have too.
It could be happening to other people, and I think from here everyone will go and check their rates after this interview.
Well, Jeff, any problems with the yellow and the green?
No problems at all, Brady. They're fine.
Yep, as far as you know.
Yes. Well, as far as I know.
Yeah.
I believe they are.
Now I've got him thinking,
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today, Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
Dr. Paul, how are you this morning?
I'm doing fine.
All right.
Let's talk about Ukraine. You know, we haven't talked about Ukraine for 24 hours?
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
A few hours.
But people have, and we have talked about Ukraine for a good while, and they were in the news, especially even after the Cold War was breaking down. There was wheeling and dealing back then, and we had promised, Russia to behave yourself, and we're not going to put anything near your border, so we're going to stay out of Eastern Europe and the whole works. Didn't work out that way. Somebody did some fibbing. I don't know whether you'd call it lying, but it was diplomatic fibbing, and people are unhappy, and there's a lot of negative consequences from that we're dealing with now. Because the headline this morning, because of course the NATO meeting is going on, Zelensky slams NATO's vague commitment on Ukraine's membership. That is the big deal. You know, are they going to become members? Now, the White House had a statement about this that should tip us off. White House says Ukraine joining NATO means war with Russia.
Yeah.
And that's probably where we might be closer. I don't know whether you can be absolute, but it introduces the notion that they're moving in that direction. Not much good can come about that. But all this globalism anyway just leads to war. It's just picking up the pieces and who's going to benefit. But yesterday, before when it was just opening up, the leaders of NATO was making a statement. I thought, well, reading this, you know, if you are very naive and very hopeful, you say, well, they're talking like decent people, you know.
Yeah.
It says, and their note and their announcement was the NATO heads of state and government participating said, we fully support Ukraine's right to choose its own security arrangement. Ukraine's future is in NATO. We reaffirm the commitment we made at the 2008 summit in Bucharest, and Ukraine will do this. And they said that, I'll get this, yes, and will now begin a period of intensive engagement with both higher political levels to address the question. That sounds diplomatic, and then I thought, oh, holy man, he must be demanding something like, don't fib with me, don't mess with me, just send more money, we need weapons, and you're all in this together, and if you don't do that, somebody's going to start World War III. And even Biden says, watch out, we have to be cautious about what we're doing here. But that whole thing, that's why I have so little respect for these international conferences getting together. It's all grandstanding, and I think a little bit of that was done here, maneuvering behind the scenes, and what we hear in these statements usually have very little meaning compared to what they're saying and planning. And Zelensky, one thing is he's smart enough, and from his viewpoint, not bashful in stating the facts. So he takes on his allies by saying, yeah, this is good, but I'm sick and tired of what you guys are doing. The money's not coming in fast enough, and you're going to suffer if you don't do it. So he's not been bashful.
No, that's for sure. Well, I think, this is the Vilnius Summit, the annual summit of NATO, and I think really in terms of what happened with Ukraine and the NATO members, there are three things to kind of unpack. One of them is pre-summit, the other is what happened in the final communique, and then the third is the fallout from what happened. And so here's at least how I can piece it together. Now, this is the Washington Post, if we can put that first clip up. Now, before the summit even happened, Zelensky infuriated NATO. This is the Washington Post from yesterday. Zelensky slams NATO for admitting a timeline for Ukraine to join. So he's on his way to this conference. I don't know if he really thought this is what he was going to get, but he's furious because he got wind before he got there of the fact that there's going to be nothing concrete. They're basically going to say, same old, same old. And so he's furious. If you can put the next one on, this is from that same article. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Tuesday, which is yesterday, jolted a summit of NATO leaders by blasting their joint statement on his country's prospective membership, decrying its lack of concrete timeline as, quote, unprecedented and absurd. That is a tough call on his part. And a lot of people have speculated that this is kind of a negotiating bluff. He wanted to come in hard and heavy and be very strong to try to shock them into changing their final communique, which had been pre-written and which surprised him. But if you can put the next one on, now here's what he says. This is the exact words he used. And he was furious in his tweet. Now, on the way to Vilnius, we received signals that certain wording is being discussed about Ukraine without Ukraine. And remember, the thing has always been nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So here he's saying, well, hang on, you're talking about stuff without bringing us into it. And then he said, and I would like to emphasize that this wording is about the invitation to become NATO member, not about Ukraine's membership. It's unprecedented and absurd when time frame is not set either for the invitation nor for Ukraine's membership. And if we go to the next one, you can see this is his actual tweet. It's a lengthy tweet. He's blowing his top because he got wind of the communique, Dr. Paul, and he realized that the communique only included a vague reference to membership. And as you pointed out in your opening statement, yeah, you can come in anytime. You can apply anytime, but nothing concrete. And so that was, I don't know if he expected to have one, but that was a huge letdown for him, and he blew his top.
Since things are in flux and Zelensky's not getting what he wants, and the other side has more money and more weapons, and they're going to do what they want to do, but I'll tell you what, there's always limits because the people behind the scenes may be able to manipulate events that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on even those who are determined not to go in. And that is, a false flag event. Something happened that you can't ignore it. Look at what they've done, and we have to really, start doing more for Ukraine. We have to go after Russia because that's exactly what they talk about. We need this. The origination of this in 2014 was very clearly NATO versus Russia. It always annoys me when it's routinely announced in the press and our media, both sides on the media. This war, was started by the Russia invasion of Ukraine. Russia started the whole thing.
Unprovoked.
But there's a lot of qualification dealing with that to accept that at par, openly. But that's what they do. But I still always fear, that an accident can happen. It doesn't even have to be done by smart people who know how to do it. Sometimes blowing up these pipelines and all, they're not accidents. They're not unintended consequences. But so far, it takes probably some serious thinking with Russia, because there's a little bit of ganging up on Russia, and they're probably trying to get Russia to overreact or something, and expand the war. Who knows what? But I think that would be the worst thing, where people just forget everything. Just how quickly the sentiment changed from a little old virus that people were complaining about to 3 years of lockdown with the persistent destructions of our liberties, which have persisted since. And that was a change like that because of an event, and there's still people wearing masks around town.
Yeah. Now, by saying what you said, which is the idea that this is unprovoked is not true, they would call you a Russian apologist. We would say, in fact, no, our message is stop provoking people. Don't provoke people with nuclear weapons. It's a dumb idea. It doesn't mean that Russia's a saint, and it's wonderful what they did. It's saying don't provoke people. It's a good policy. But so what Zelensky, I think, wanted from this summit is he wanted a concrete invite, but vague details. Like, he would rather not have vague details, but his compromise is, okay, invite me, but give me like a vague timeline so I can go back home and say, we're invited, we're going to go in, here's what we have to do, but not specific. He didn't get either, in fact, and I think that would infuriate him. That's what infuriated him. But what he did get is an admission from Jens Stoltenberg, who's been the chief, he's the NATO Secretary General. He's been the chief cheerleader for this war from the beginning. He got a dose of cold water and hard truth, and we're going to play that first clip. But essentially what Stoltenberg is saying in this press conference is, unless Ukraine wins this war, i.e. prevails in this war, there's not even an issue of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO or getting any guarantees. So we must ensure that Ukraine wins. And everyone knows, even the U.S. government knows, that Ukraine is not winning. So let's listen to, in his own words, Stoltenberg spilling the beans on this whole thing.
I agree that the most imminent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation in Europe. So the most important thing we can do is to continue to provide weapons, ammunition, military support to Ukraine, because unless Ukraine prevails as a nation, as a democratic nation in Europe, there is no issue to be discussed about security guarantees or membership in NATO at all. I agree that the most
What he's saying, Dr. Paul, is that we're going to keep doing what we have been doing, i.e. providing weapons that is clearly not working. We're going to do the same thing and hope for different results.
Yeah.
So that's basically his...
That's not a new policy. It has been going on for a long time. You know, this idea that you suggested that Zelensky was a little bit annoyed not being treated like a first-class diplomat, you know, and invited him to come there and move along on that. But, you know, one thing that annoyed me, I guess it's been probably a year now, I don't know the exact date, is when Zelensky comes over here and he's in the midst of all this thing, and he, you know, to say it politely, he's a crony, but he's been involved in very controversial politics, and sometimes that we have welcomed some people in the midst of revolutions that turned out they were the bad guys. I have no idea what's going to happen, but for him to be able to come to Congress, you know, I just think that Congress, you know, they do so many dumb things and bad things. If I thought that was a move that, you know, that is nice. That's a peace offering, you know, to get along with people and let them express themselves. But I personally, and I don't have a legal reason for not doing it or constitutional reason to not allow it to happen. But it annoys me that they gave him that much, and now he's annoyed because he didn't get the same reception at the NATO meeting. I think that's essentially what he wanted. He probably wanted to be the kingpin there and running the show.
Yeah. Well, you remember when he spoke before Congress, he said, the Battle of Bakhmut will change the course of the war. Well, they lost that battle, and he was actually right, because it did change the course, but not in his favor.
Yeah.
So here's what the NATO communique said, the final communique of the summit said. Now skip that next one and go to the next one. This is paragraph 11 of the communique, if we can have it. This is the operative, this is the key statement. The alliance will support Ukraine in making these reforms on its path toward future membership. We will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance when allies agree. Go back, please. When allies agree and conditions are met. That is exactly the statement essentially from 2008, i.e. nothing has changed in the intervening years. You'll get in when we say you can get in, full stop. So that is essentially what they gave him after encouraging him to fight this war. And I added this picture because if you could put the entire Vilnius summit in one photograph, this next one is what it would look like if you put it on. Here, if you can even expand it maybe, because this is going around the internet. You see everyone else at the NATO summit greeting each other, having a good time talking, and there's Zelensky just sitting there without a friend in the world.
You know what the problem is? He didn't follow dress code.
That's right. They thought he was the waiter. They thought he was the waiter. But then the final thing I'm going to say here, Dr. Paul, is then after this, Jake Sullivan really did say the quiet part out loud. If you can put that next tweet up. And this is not an audio. I mean, I'm not going to put the audio. I'm just going to read it. If you can put that next tweet up. This is what Jake Sullivan said, and you referred to it earlier on, Dr. Paul. The admission of Ukraine to NATO today would mean a war between the alliance and the United States with Russia, said National Security Advisor to the American President Jake Sullivan. Quote, why NATO, including the United States, each of the 31 members, were not ready to accept Ukraine. So that's why, because they finally said the quiet part out loud. Duh, of course, if we do this and Article 5 applies, then we'll be at war with Russia. And we've been teasing and pretending and waltzing around this whole issue for the past year, but the fact is, we can't come in. Just kidding, guys. Keep fighting down to the last Ukrainian.
You know, you quoted that last sentence that was made. This is the conclusion. It was a one sentence. It really you know, as you pointed out, it had been said before. They're saying it again, but all this other mishmash, it goes through it. But the position was stated there. But still, I think the people behind the scenes sometimes have other plans, and I'll probably be wrong, and that's okay. That I worry about some type of an event that changes people's minds. People do change their mind quickly, especially if it involves the people behind the scenes. It might not affect our politicians quickly, but the people behind the scenes might say, boy, this is it. Now the pressure is going to be put on our politicians, and you know, it's possible that even a person like President Biden might change his mind or something. You know,
I don't know about
maybe
that.
he'll say maybe he will say it's not that dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, you never know. I mean, the one thing that did come out of this, we didn't have this in what we were talking about before, is that the UK and France did agree to send long-range missiles. The US has not agreed to send ATACMS. Those have a 300-kilometer range, and they can hit deep in Russia. That may provoke the final response from Russia if they do that. It's probably, I think, a very bad idea. But the one other thing I wanted to point out about this, Dr. Paul, is the reaction from the UK, because the UK, as you know, has been the driving mechanism in the war machine. They've been the yipping lapdog on the U.S. neocons. War, war, war. They're all for it. And particularly the Ben Wallace, the defense secretary of the UK, has been extremely, extremely pro-Ukraine war, pro-Zelensky. But even he, after Zelensky's explosion, really had to say something. And here's what he said. The Guardian captures very well the sentiment that's arising in the UK. We're not Amazon. UK Defense Secretary suggests Ukraine could say thank you more. So he is saying, look, guys, you could say thank you. Let's put the next one up. This is from that same article in The Guardian, because it's not just the UK, but the US. And here's what he says. Wallace says, whether we like it or not, people want to see a bit of gratitude, he said at the summit. Sometimes you're asking countries to give up their own stocks of weapons. Sometimes you have to persuade lawmakers on Capitol Hill in America. And this continues, that's Wallace again, and the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told a public forum at the summit he believed, quote, the American people do deserve a degree of gratitude from the U.S. government for their willingness to step up, and from the rest of the world as well, i.e. Ukraine, stop yelling at us for more weapons, stop yelling at us for NATO membership, just say thank you, shut up, and keep dying. That's the message.
You know, they talked about other things at the meeting, and the one that caught my attention was they did mention China and Russia.
Yeah.
And I consider that very, very dangerous because, you know, we're provoking once again, you know, the whole situation there. But we were criticizing China for talking to Russia.
Yeah.
You know, we put sanctions on both of them, and then they started saying, hey, let's talk this over. What are we doing? Could we alter this and do some trading? And then if they do some trading above board, and they don't use weapons to do it, and then they start outclassing us in some of our sales and moving ahead, then all of a sudden, and NATO has to go along, because evidently that was the American position, slam China, you know. So that to me, that might have been one of the biggest deals that they sneak in there, and they have to pursue that, because if you listen to the U.S. Congress, see, that's going to be an easy fight to motivate the Congress.
Yeah.
You know, is the China issue. So that to me is a shame that that's happening, and this whole idea that we own the world, and you know, we can put on sanctions and boycott and blockade and everything else, but if somebody else does it, then you shouldn't do that. That's not being nice. We don't like you for that.
You're right. I mean, that exposes the whole hypocrisy, because when it comes to Ukraine, then the U.S. says, well, Ukraine has the right to choose its own alliances. If it wants to join NATO, that's fine. But then with China aligning with Russia, they don't have any right to do this. How dare they do this? So, and the rest of the world sees this. You know, they're not a bunch of dopes out there. They know what's going on. So anyway, let's move on to our second story. And this is kind of an interesting story, because we saw this on Zero Hedge yesterday. We know the recent Supreme Court decision about affirmative action. A lot of people are cheering that decision, that it is proven to be unconstitutional. Let's put up this next clip, because the reaction among black Americans is kind of interesting. They did a poll right after that, And this is the headline: more Black Americans support the Supreme Court affirmative action ruling than oppose it, according to a new poll from YouGov and The Economist. If you go to the next one, this is from that same article. According to the poll, 44% of Black respondents said they at least somewhat support the recent rulings in Students for Fair Admissions versus the University of North Carolina and Harvard, which eliminated race-based admissions practices from college campuses. Only 36% of Blacks polled approve. So more African Americans are saying, yeah, we don't like affirmative action, than the ones that are saying, yeah, we got to keep it going. That's kind of an interesting development.
You know, what this does, it refreshes some people's memory that all this affirmative action is faking.
Yeah.
Faking this need, this moral high ground that they have to help people. And there may be some need for that when there's a policy like enslaving people.
Yeah.
Yes, you can specifically state it and say what has to be done. But all this affirmative action and reparations, this gets way out of control. And that's based on the assumption that on a daily basis, it's political power. They can go back 100 years and say, so such and such happened that we have to do this. But it's based on the assumption that the minorities who want or need help for various reasons, you know, they need this help and they're incapable of doing it themselves.
Yeah.
I remember so clearly, Walter Williams, a good friend of mine who's passed away, is a libertarian black economist, which was a great combination because he could speak to this, and he did. He was
great.
always annoyed. He said he would say it in public and just sort of enjoyed saying it. He said, "I don't need a black leader." So, but in a way, there are a lot of black leaders. But if they're leading us toward liberty and less government, they're despised by the so-called black leaders that Walter Williams couldn't stand.
Yeah, like Clarence Thomas, how they hate him with the passion.
Oh yeah, still.
Yeah, they hate him with the passion. I mean, I can see this. I mean, it cheapens the perception of the quality of the education that they receive, that somehow they got a hand. So it doesn't surprise me, and I'm pleased about it, about this view. But I also wanted, we talked about this before the show, to bring up kind of an interesting contrarian perspective that I know you do share. And this came out from our good friend Jacob Hornberger, because he had a piece out this morning that we reprinted on our RonPaulInstitute.org website, because it's a contrarian but a very interesting libertarian perspective on the Supreme Court ruling. If you can put this next one up from Future Freedom. Why shouldn't a university be free to adopt affirmative action? And that's a very interesting point. And he goes on to say, if you go to the next one, he asks the real question, so why does the Supreme Court wield the authority to dictate to a private university what its admission policy is going to be? And then here's the key point. The answer is that most private universities accept government funds and their students receive government grants. So he makes a good point. Why can't they have affirmative action? How does the Supreme Court tell them they can't?
Yeah, this issue has come up now with Harvard.
Yeah.
There's some people wanting to have a little bit of freedom of choice. Oh no, then you're immoral and irresponsible and that sort of thing. But the answer, and I really agree with Bumper, because it's the issue of property. Property solves so many problems, whether it's a spiritual privacy, sexual privacy, economic privacy. It always has to be voluntary, and things can happen. But you know what my position is, and we've written about it, and that is that people have not only a right, but they enjoy being discriminate 30, 40, 50 times a day. Everything we do is a choice. We get up, we decide to do this, say hello, and it's a choice of doing one thing or another. So most things are still voluntary, but it's when the government comes in and say, oh, we don't like so-and-so for some other reason, so we're going to deny him his rights. And they come in and start regulating people, and that, of course, leads to a real problem. So voluntarism and property rights is so useful in working out answers for this, and I think people should realize to be discriminate, there was a time, Daniel, that was to be good, you know. But this discriminate, I think a good parent is very discriminating in raising children.
Yes,
I mean, if you don't discriminate about who the kids hang around with, and that's one thing that our family understood very clearly. The people they hang around with will give you a pretty good indication of some of the things you have to contend with. And but sorting all this out of, I think, is private property, private choices, and family members, and not only not the federal government, but government per se. If the government gets involved when there is the private use of force, forcing people to do things, and the nonsense that went on the cancellation during the the lockdown and all this stuff. That's not the answer at all. And they do it couched in the words of freedom and liberty and prosperity, and also the Constitution. Nancy Pelosi, boy, if we believe everything she said, she was the greatest constitutionalist ever in Congress.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm going to close out, and I'm just going to thank our viewers. We appreciate you watching. You can help us grow the show, and you won't have to spend a dime if you just hit like, if you subscribe, if you're not subscribed to this channel, to tell your friends to subscribe to this channel. Just to simply comment. Give your thoughts. Let us know what you think about what we're saying in the comment section, and that will make it more lively, and more engagement means we'll have more views, and it helps us in many ways. So it won't cost you a penny to help the show out, and we very, very much appreciate it. Dr. Paul, over to you.
Very good. I'm going to close by just making a short mention of an important report and legislation that occurred back in 1910, and that was that came about in the medical field to look at the medical schools and decide, well, some of these schools aren't doing so well, and they need this and that, so we're going to analyze it. So the AMA and the government got together and they came out with this Flexner report, which says, no, that is true. There are some of these, they're not up to speed. And it just turned out that there were women medical schools and minority medical schools producing physicians. Probably weren't perfect, but there were some imperfect white schools too, and there still are. But they closed them down. They said there were too many doctors coming out. The AMA, we don't like all this competition. So they closed that down, and it's been what happened. There was a shortage, and then the government had to come in and make sure that everybody got to go to medical school that wanted to, especially the minorities. So then they have to give them money, and then they have to give them control. One leads to another. There was a contrivance even back in 2010 to move in this direction. But guess what? I think 1910 is very close to that period we call the progressive era, and that was some of this nonsense. So many of our problems, can be traced to bad government judgment, bad politicians who think more of power and money, and we're facing that. But they're still alive and well. A lot of people are sick and tired of it, and they're waking up and they're rebelling against this nonsense. So that's what we have to encourage, people who believe in peace and prosperity, to move in the direction of emphasizing personal liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ukraine Council, and then we'll have time for just a few questions. Secretary General.
Good afternoon. We have just concluded an historic NATO summit. Over the past 2 days, we took major decisions to adapt our alliance for the future. We agreed NATO's most detailed and robust defense plan since the Cold War. We strengthened our commitment to defense investment. We agreed to bring Ukraine closer to the alliance and step up support for the long haul. And we deepened our partnerships around the world. I have just chaired the inaugural meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. From now on, NATO and Ukraine will meet in the Council to discuss and decide as equals. This is a significant step to move Ukraine closer to NATO. I also welcome the major new announcements of military support made by NATO allies at this summit. Allies have already provided tens of billions of dollars in military aid to help beat back Russia's invasion. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops have been trained and equipped by NATO allies, and as Ukraine continues to liberate territory, we will stand by them for as long as it takes. Yesterday, we agreed a new multi-year assistance package for Ukraine to help transition Ukraine from Soviet era to NATO equipment and standards and make their forces fully interoperable with NATO. Ukraine is now closer to NATO than ever before. Allies reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. This will change Ukraine's membership path from a two-step process to a one-step process. We will issue an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO when allies agree that conditions are met. This sends a clear, strong and united message from our Vilnius summit. We must ensure that when this war ends, there are credible arrangements in place for Ukraine's security, so that history does not repeat itself. I welcome that many allies have now committed to providing long-term security assistance to Ukraine. This will help deter any future aggression from Russia after the war ends. This morning, we met with the leaders of Australia, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea, as well as the European Union. NATO is a regional alliance, but we face global challenges. What happens in Europe matters to the Indo-Pacific. And what happens in the Indo-Pacific matters to North America and Europe. Beijing's global assertiveness and Moscow's war against Ukraine require even closer coordination between NATO, the EU, and our Indo-Pacific partners. We condemn North Korea's nuclear and missile programs, including its latest missile launch. This violates multiple UN Security Council resolutions and pose a threat to regional and global security. NATO is reinforcing our ties with Australia, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea with tailored partnership programs, including joint work on issues like maritime security, new technologies, cyber, climate change and resilience. We will work even more closely together, standing strong for the rules-based international order. We face the most serious security situation in decades, but allies are rising to the challenge. NATO is more united than ever, standing strong in defense of our people and our values. I would like to close by thanking President Nausėda, the Lithuanian government and the people of Vilnius for hosting this historic summit. I look forward to the Washington summit next year, marking the 75th anniversary of our alliance. And with that, I'm ready to take some questions.
Politico. Politico.
Thank you very much, Lily Bayer from Politico. Secretary General, after reading the communique, some Ukrainians have raised concerns that perhaps some Western capitals may be preparing for a situation where Ukraine's NATO membership would be a chip in a negotiation with Russia. What is your response to Ukrainians who have that concern at the moment? Thank you.
We had a very good meeting with President Zelensky and his delegation today, where he welcomed the very strong message from NATO allies. He welcomed the establishment of the NATO-Ukraine Council and also the clear commitment to move Ukraine closer to membership. So this was not an issue raised in any of those meetings. And I think it is extremely important to recognize that the decisions we have made, all NATO allies, is the strongest ever message on Ukraine and membership that this alliance ever made. By stating clearly that Ukraine will become a member, that Ukraine's future is in NATO, and also then describing the path forward with the practical support for ensuring interoperability, with strengthening the political ties with the NATO-Ukraine Council, and then by removing the requirement for a membership action plan. Then negotiations to solve the conflict in Ukraine will only happen when Ukraine is ready for negotiations. And as we have stated again and again, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. What we do know is that the more military support we provide to Ukraine, the more land they are able to liberate, the stronger their hand will be at the negotiating table. And therefore, we continue and the message from this summit and from NATO allies with new announcements of long-range cruise missiles, of more armored vehicles with more advanced air defense systems and training of F-16 pilots, is that we support them to liberate land so they will have a stronger hand at the negotiating table. That's what this is about. It's not about NATO negotiating on behalf of Ukraine.
Okay, we'll go to the gentleman in the front row here.
Hello, Ken Moriyasu from Nikkei Asia. Secretary General, there was talk about opening a NATO liaison office in Tokyo, but that was not mentioned in the communique whatsoever. Is this plan dead, or is there plans to revive it towards the end of the year? Is opening at a different location an option? And we know that France was very much openly opposed to this plan. Were there any other countries that were opposed to the idea as well? Thank you.
This morning I met with Prime Minister Kishida from Japan, and that was a very good meeting where we both recognized and stated clearly the importance of further strengthening the partnership, the work we do together, Japan and NATO. It is also Prime Minister Kishida that has so clearly stated that what happens in Europe matters for Asia, and what happens in Asia matters for Europe. And he also went to Ukraine and visited Kiev and demonstrated his clear commitment to provide support to Ukraine. We also agreed today a new individual partnership program between NATO and Ukraine, where we describe the different work strands where we're going to deepen our cooperation. This is about cyber, it's about maritime security, it's about countering hybrid threats, including disinformation, and in other areas where we see the potential for NATO and Japan working more closely together. The issue of liaison office is still on the table. It will be considered in the future.
Okay. Yon Hap News Agency, lady in the third row. Yeah.
Yes. How will NATO engage more in Indo-Pacific security regarding China and North Korea? And how will the partnership with Indo-Pacific partners develop in the future? Are you planning to invite them next year too?
A very strong and clear message from this meeting, and especially the meeting we had with our partners this morning, the Indo-Pacific partners, Australia, Japan, South Korea and New Zealand, is that security is not regional, security is global, and therefore we really have to stand together. China's heavy investments in new military capabilities demonstrates that. We expect that China by 2035 will have 1,500 nuclear warheads on missiles that can reach North America and the whole of Europe, NATO territory. We see how China is coming closer to us. This is not about NATO becoming a global military alliance, but this is about recognizing that this region faces global challenges, and the rise of China is a part of that, and that China is coming close to us in Africa, in the Arctic, but also trying to control critical infrastructure, and of course we see them also in cyberspace. So therefore we have now different tailored programs with all our Indo-Pacific partners describing different areas, but it's very often also it's partly about cyber, countering disinformation, maritime security. There's also Japanese staff at NATO's maritime headquarters in northward in the United Kingdom. So we are working on different practical ways of working together, including by participation of Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific partners in our cyber exercises. So we are gradually expanding what we are doing together, simply because our security is interlinked, and just a recent missile launch of North Korea demonstrates that, because that's of course a challenge to the region. It's a threat to the region, but it's also undermining global peace and stability, the North Korean missile and nuclear programs, and the launch we just saw yesterday.
ARD, third row.
Markus Preiss with ARD. Secretary General, two questions, if I may. The first one also on President Zelensky. You said that he welcomed the language of the communique today. That's right, but he called exactly the same communique yesterday absurd. Is he sometimes going too far, risking to alienate also partners who spend a lot of political capital and real capital in order to help him? That's the first question. And the second one is very technical. If countries engage in security agreements or guarantees for Ukraine, does that count on the 2% spending goal? Thank you.
Well, what counts, to take that first, what counts against the 2% spending is every expenditure that falls within NATO's definition of defense expenditure. So if we speak about military expenditures, that is defined as defense expenditure according to the NATO definition, then it counts. If it doesn't fall under that definition, it doesn't count. That is the case in a way, regardless of what kind of framework this is spent within. And the first question. Now, well, also on the communique, I think, of course, we all understand the extremely difficult situation that Ukraine is in. I mean, they are in the middle of the war. There are casualties every day. There's a counteroffensive facing fierce resistance, dug in Russian forces, landmines, and a brutal warfare from the Russian side. And of course, that's also the reason why Ukraine and again has asked for more support, and also why allies have stepped up with also gradually more and more advanced weapon systems. I welcome that. Our support has evolved as the war has evolved, and our political relationships have also evolved as this war has evolved. So therefore we made the decisions at this summit. I'm glad that President Zelensky welcomed both the creation of the NATO-Ukraine Council, the fact that we removed the requirement for membership action plan, moving Ukraine closer to NATO, and also the fact that this is the strongest ever expression of the path forward, the united message on membership for Ukraine from this alliance.
Okay. We'll go with, I think we had Reuters, AP, sorry.
Lorne Cook from Associated Press. You've said once again, the whole summit has shown how close you want to bring Ukraine to NATO. You've said that it requires credible security arrangements so these kinds of things don't happen in the future, and some of the biggest allies through the G7 have made commitments. How much appetite is there within NATO to actually go to Ukraine? What about some kind of peacekeeping mission once this is sorted out, and actually put your boots on the ground there if Ukraine can't come to NATO?
I think it's wrong now to speculate exactly on how this will be done in the future after the war ends. The most important thing now is to ensure that the war ends in a just and lasting way. And again, that's the reason why the most urgent task, the most important task, is the continued flow of military support. And I think we have really realized many months ago that this is a war of attrition, meaning a battle of logistics. It is important that we deliver different advanced weapon systems, but as important as delivering new systems is it that we are able to maintain and sustain all the systems which are already there. An enormous amount of ammunition, spare parts, maintenance, repair capacity. And maybe that's not as easy to get public attraction on this day-to-day hard work to sustain, but without sustaining all the systems, the Ukrainians will not be able to defend their land and to liberate the territory. I say this because then when the war ends and there's some kind of arrangements, then I think all NATO allies have to sit down and agree exactly what type of arrangements. Part of this will also then be the membership path, because we have agreed that Ukraine's future is in NATO. We reaffirm that Ukraine will become a member. We actually have agreed on concrete tools, political tools, practical tools to help Ukraine move towards membership. And then, of course, everyone understands that a final decision on this cannot be taken before there is some kind of end to this war.
Colleagues, I know there are lots of questions. I'm afraid we have to end this here. So thank you very much. This concludes this press conference.
Thank you so much.
The heart of where innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
I'm Caroline Hyde of Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York. Ed Ludlow, he's on assignment in Sun Valley. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, we'll bring you the latest on Microsoft's $69 billion deal for Activision. That says companies, they get a new shot at winning over the UK on the acquisition. Plus, we'll speak to one analyst who says Meta's Threads, well, it could add, $8 billion in revenue per year in the next couple of years? We'll discuss. And the Big Four accounting firm KPMG, it partners with Microsoft for a multi-billion-dollar partnership to incorporate, you guessed it, generative AI into its business. We sit down with the KPMG CEO, Paul Krupp. But first, let's check in on those markets, and I'm very pleased to welcome Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle on that.
Wonderful to be here with you, Caroline. And we've got a bit of a risk-on tone for stocks. We do have the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and the other major indexes higher. But I will note that we're off the highs. Now, at the highs, these indexes up more than 1% on the cooler-than-expected inflation report. That sent yields lower, which really is helping stocks in terms of a valuation perspective. They look a little bit less expensive. That's especially true for big tech, such as NVIDIA and Microsoft. So those stocks, the big tech names that had been under some pressure earlier this week on the upcoming special NASDAQ 100 rebalancing, well, today they're getting a bit of a bid. Now, this is showing on the communication services sector on the year, the second best sector on the year, right now up about 37%. And you guessed it, a couple of the names helping out today. Meta, of course, Threads, their Twitter competition, or the competition to Twitter, it is really getting a bit of a boost. I know that there are some analysts out there that think it could be a significant revenue boost for Meta. We also have Alphabet trading higher on the day. If we flip up the boards, we will see some of these big tech tech names really flying. Microsoft, Alphabet getting a bid off of the lower yields as well. A bit of a reprieve for big tech overall, Caroline. So while the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100 even may be off their highs, these big tech names really hanging on to some of the gains.
Certainly are. And let's talk about a couple of those key names at the moment, because over in the UK, the antitrust watchdog has said that a new merger investigation into Microsoft's $69 billion Activision deal, well, it may be needed if the duo restructure their deal to try and reverse that previous UK veto. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Leah Nyland, who's just been all across the competition analysis of this deal. And I mean, is this a good thing to go back to square one?
In this case, it actually is. So the UK had vetoed Microsoft and Activision before, effectively blocking the deal. But after yesterday, when a US court said the deal can move forward, the UK sort of agreed to give it a second look, which is pretty unheard of. But in order to do that, they said Microsoft and Activision need to restructure it a little. So they're not looking at exactly the same thing. So Microsoft and Activision are going to make an offer to the UK and sort of restart negotiations over whether they might approve their deal.
But in many ways, people have sort of said that the FTC and other regulators have got a bit of a win on their hands already, because they have forced changes to the way in which, well, competitors might be able to access the games eventually owned by Microsoft, Call of Duty being the key one. What other ways could they alleviate any anxiety around a lack of competition?
Yeah, so this was one of the things that the judge here in the U.S. made a big point of, is that the regulators had already won a little bit by getting Microsoft to offer these 10-year deals to a lot of its rivals. So those deals they have with like Nintendo and Valve, the PC gaming company, and they've also offered them to some of the people who do streaming games as well. But the thing about the UK CMA is they really hate what they call behavioral remedies. So like when a company is just offering to do something like a 10-year contract, they want something, what they call structural. So they want Microsoft or Activision to actually offer to sell something off. So Microsoft and Activision are now sort of in the position of trying to decide what it is that they might be willing to sort of, cleave off from their main deal in order to sort of placate UK regulators.
Overall, Claire, does this feel once again that kind of big tech's almost winning here in terms of getting these deals through?
That's a good question. I mean, the FTC is expected to appeal as soon as this afternoon, so it's not technically over here in the US. But yeah, the antitrust laws are definitely not really able to take on the tech stuff. You know, we already had the FTC losing earlier this year in the Meta Within case. Although the difference with the UK is, you know, they have a little bit of a better law. It's a little bit harder to appeal. So you had them blocking Meta Giphy. So Meta is now actually going to have to spin off Giphy, even though the CMA was the only place in the world that had opposed that deal.
Interesting, this backward look at some of these big deals. Leah Nyland, thank you so much for bringing it to us. And interestingly, we're going to dig into Meta in particular. We just finished that conversation with Leah on Meta. Let's dig into that company in particular, because we have been all over Threads, of course. More than 100 million people signing up. I'm sure plenty more than that now. And it is sort of, for many, becoming a Twitter alternative, an add-on. And over the next couple of years, one analyst sees that Threads could reach close to 200 million daily active users and generate, well, about $8 billion in annual revenue. Joining us now is that analyst, Mark Mahaney, Evercore ISI Senior Managing Director. You've got an outperform rating on Meta, $350 price target. Interestingly, it's no longer your number one top pick because of the rampant, rapid rise in the share price that we have seen on the back of this year, really. But Mark, the Threads, $8 billion sounds like a lot, but it's not compared to the annual revenue in total.
Yes, but all of that I agree with, Caroline. I like the way you set it up. Could they get to $8 billion in revenue? One of the biggest, the easiest part of that math, if you will, is the revenue that they could get per user. Twitter has a documented history. They were generating about $20 in ad revenue per user. Meta, Facebook also has a documented history here. They've been able to generate monetization levels 2 to 3x that of Twitter. And I don't think it's because they spam ads all over the user interface, although maybe they do a little of that. It's because they are much better at targeting and matching advertisers with users. They are able to find relevant audiences for advertisers and marketers to put relevant ads against, and they're able to track the performance of those. That's why you've got almost 10 million advertisers that are on. There's a lot of these are small businesses, obviously, that are on Meta. So yeah, they'll be able to better monetize if they get the users. The question is whether they will or not. But that 100 million ramp is outstanding.
When do you think we might see that switched on? We know Mark Zuckerberg himself, and we've heard from Anna Mosseri as well, saying, look, we're not going to think about putting the advertising out there until we have a line of sight on 1 billion users. Do you think that's really what they're going to be waiting for?
I take them at their word on that. Since these numbers that we're talking about, even at 8 billion, I know that sounds like a big number. That's only kind of a mid-single-digit % impact for Meta. So it's not like they need the ad revenue near term. In fact, I think the absolute genius strategy here would be show no ads. Bring more and more users onto Threads. And the Threads experience has got to improve dramatically. I assume it will. I assume it'll be easier for us to use it for the great things that we've used Twitter for in the past. When Uber CFO, the news came out that he may be resigning. If you go to Twitter, if you'd gone to Twitter, you would have found plenty of relevant news articles about it. If you'd gone to Threads, you wouldn't have seen anything. Like, there's that real-time news element that's really great, magical about Twitter. So there's some of that needs to be built at Threads. What I just find interesting, the setup here for Meta is, I think Twitter as an asset has been fundamentally underinvested in for a couple of years, not just since Musk took over the company, but for a couple of years, both on the advertiser side and on the user side. That created the opportunity for Threads that can just bring in so many new users from its existing database, its existing user base of 1.5 billion users.
Well, the race is now on, therefore, and it feels as though Twitter has been making changes in terms of brand safety to a large extent. And at the same time, they've got this sort of window before Meta does turn on the advertising switch to an extent. How much do you think, Twitter is so embedded as our lifestyle and our use case? Can Threads really keep the zeitgeist going?
Well, I guess we should, I think the sober assessment is we should assume that Twitter will be the leading real-time news, public town square, communications platform, for the next 5 to 10 years. They probably will maintain that leading position, but it's so interesting that there's this opening created. So it is possible that Threads, if they can come up with a better product, their product's not better than Twitter now, but could they make one that's better? They certainly have the potential to do that. They've got the engineering talent to do that, and they can certainly bring in a lot more users. And there's a couple of really simple things that they've done. I mean, when you think about the challenges that Twitter has had, its onboarding challenge for a lot of people is real. Like, what do I get out of Twitter? It just seems like a deluge of information. How do I find something useful? I think Threads has made it easy for people to come in, to find followers and to find people to follow, i.e. their friends, people that they know. And then, and they've done it in a way that maybe seems more, user-friendly, that's less caustic as an environment. That's something that still needs to be addressed on Twitter. It's been a long-standing battle on Twitter, how to get some of that uncivil commentary off the site. So there's a real opportunity here for Threads. That's what I'm more intrigued by. It's all potential, but these 100 million users in less than a week, we've never seen that before.
Mark, here we have a conversation about competition being added. For many, it's a worry about competition being taken away. I'm thinking of Meta as, I think, in a closed room tomorrow in the EU, having to try and vindicate Marketplace in particular and how they haven't reduced unfairly competition there. How much is regulation a headwind to all of the big tech names right now?
It's going to be a constant presence, constant headwind going forwards. If I simplify all this, Caroline, I think about 3 types of regulation. There's kind of monopoly power regulation, privacy, and then third is kind of social health kind of sort of regulation. When it comes to Meta, there's no monopoly regulatory risk. I mean, if there really was a monopolistic power at Facebook, you never would have had TikTok. We obviously have TikTok. So if there's a new social media, there's nothing to stop people from creating a new social media outlet and for driving traffic there if they have a really good service. TikTok proved that. The other issues are more serious, the privacy issues, but I think Facebook has kind of come around and relatively reasonably addressed that. And the social health impact of Facebook, that's waxed and waned. I think we had a point where we dramatize the impact of social media on social health. There are plenty of other parts of media that have positive and negative impacts on social health. So I just sort of think we've moved away from that. Maybe we've also matured a little bit in how we think about those risks. So, but they're going to be long-standing. It comes with the territory because you've just invited everybody to make a comment, and not all those comments are going to be good.
Mark Mahaney, Evercore ISI analyst. We didn't even get on to your Uber perspective, your top pick. Interesting on the Domino's news today. We thank you so much. Of course, Mark Mahaney from Evercore ISI. Meanwhile, coming up, we've got to discuss that big deal, KPMG and Microsoft entering a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar AI and cloud services agreement. We discuss the announcement next. KPMG CEO, Paul Knopp. And meanwhile, let's just look at what's happening with Shopify, up more than 1%. But let's go to the nitty-gritty, the fascinating story that this company is basically putting a price tag on time, rolling out a calculator embedded in your calendar if you're an employee there that estimates the cost of any meeting of 3 or more people. Basically, the company's new internal tool is trying to push you to be more productive, take away what they project to be 322,000 hours of meetings this year by basically putting a price tag on it. It's expensive, folks. This is Bloomberg. Big Four accounting firm KPMG has just announced a multi-billion-dollar commitment in Microsoft Cloud and AI services over the next 5 years. It is expected, though, to bring in more than $12 billion in added revenue. Joining us now to discuss the partnership is Paul Knopp, KPMG CEO. And so talk to us this commitment, but to bring more in. I'm assuming this is all a productivity boost?
Well, you know, you think about the velocity of change right now, Caroline, and the speed of innovation. And generative AI, many of us weren't even talking about it 9 months ago. Now it's all anybody wants to talk about. It's amazing, that velocity of change and speed of innovation. So to co-develop solutions with Microsoft for all of our businesses, audit, tax, and advisory, that we can bring to market. Some of those solutions are already under development and some are in nascent stages, but we're really excited about the power of that partnership and what we can bring to market in the future, working together with Microsoft. So we'll spend $2 billion or invest $2 billion over the next 5 years on AI and cloud, and we expect to generate about $12 billion of additional revenue over the next several years through cybersecurity solutions, through cloud migration, and also through new innovative applications that use generative AI.
So with your own workforce having the early access to Microsoft 365 Copilot, the Azure OpenAI service, ultimately, will you have a competitive edge? Will others follow your lead? Will they also do deals with Microsoft?
So there's no doubt they will. This is not an exclusive arrangement, and we are going to be investing in generative AI across the board, so we're looking for additional opportunities. But we think our long-standing relationship with Microsoft, which dates back to 2000, and our history of working with them as a partner, even going to market with them with 2,500 clients as joint clients, that we have an edge in the sense that we have that long, strong history of development. And we're going to ideate with them. The power of their technology with the power of our knowledge, experience in advisory, tax, auditing is a really great combination for ensuring that we can solve our clients' most complex problems and actually also help our communities and society be better.
How are you selling this to your workforce? Because a lot of anxiety is out there that, look, AI is going to take our jobs.
Right. Well, if I look at the 40 years I've been at KPMG and I think about the history of technology, I haven't seen a technology disruption. I think this is the greatest technology disruption in many decades. I haven't seen one yet that's caused a loss of workforce on a gross basis and a net basis. So I actually believe that workforces over time will grow with generative AI. We're going to need more people to interpret results, to co-develop solutions, to develop solutions. We're going to need more data scientists. We're going to need a lot of quality and cyber assessments of the information that the generative AI applications produce. So as I think about that history of technology disruption and what it's done to workforce, it's actually generated economic activity that should allow for us to grow our workforces in the future. And actually also, put some of those mundane routine tasks that people don't enjoy doing and upskill people to do more interesting, creative things.
And you've been out to the executives that you work for, the clients, and they seem to agree. They're also saying, look, this is actually going to add to employees. This is going to add to our productivity. That's
right. So, we just completed a survey recently where 80% of executives said that this would be a major disruption. 75% said to be their top emerging technology for the next 18 months. And there's general agreement, too, that it was going to add headcount over time. So we feel pretty confident that it will also reduce stress because some of these mundane tasks, again, will no longer have to be done by people, and they can then provide more value-added advice, do more creative things in the work environment.
Here's to having more exciting work. I'm interested though, you've referenced cyber and the way in which you're going to be using generative AI there. A lot of the worries, and there's been this quick adoption by companies to use OpenAI, team with Microsoft, but they don't want their own workforce using it because they're worried about their own data and it somehow, well, ending up in the data troves that are going to be in my own ChatGPT. How have you dealt with that, the privacy angle?
So when we use a ChatGPT version, we use it in our own secure environment, not the open source application that's out there, which provides a lot of protection. And we also really value the enterprise protection and security that Microsoft brings to us. So we want to use AI responsibly, ethically, and in a very secure environment. As we develop these solutions, we're going to ensure that companies have that same kind of security, governance, and architecture built around their solutions. That's going to be very important for the future because there are those concerns, along with concerns around data accuracy too.
Well, we continue to see how that is monitored and improved on and iterated, and as you say, a big disruption that we're in. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about the deal.
Pleasure being here.
He's the KPMG CEO. We thank him. Meanwhile, speaking of taxes, I don't know if you saw that Democratic lawmakers, led by Senator Elizabeth Warren, have actually called on federal officials to investigate whether the tax prep companies focused on the consumer, like H&R Block, and some tech giants, have actually broken the law when they shared sensitive information for millions of taxpayers entered into their websites. Now, the practices might have violated taxpayer rights as well as privacy laws, opening them to billions of dollars of liability, according to the senators. Tune in tonight, live 5:30 p.m., because we've got an interview with Senator Warren. This is Bloomberg. Time now for Talking Tech. First up, China-based hackers, they breached a series of email accounts linked to government agencies in the US and Europe. Now, the hackers accessed and exported unclassified Microsoft data from a small number of accounts. Plus, chip designer ARM is in talks with NVIDIA to join a group of potential investors to anchor its initial public offering, according to the Financial Times. Now, NVIDIA, which is a long-time partner of ARM, is seeking to invest at a valuation of $35 to $40 billion, is being reported. Meanwhile, Elon Musk will hold an event broadcast on Twitter Spaces focused on artificial intelligence. And he's invited two prominent US House lawmakers, Democrat and Republican state leaders, will speak with Musk for about 45 minutes tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Meanwhile, let's talk about AI a little bit more, because today's big take, how AI can make politics more dangerous, with AI holding the potential to supercharge dissemination of misinformation in political campaigns, among other things. We really want to dig into that, the highs, the lows of AI. Bloomberg's Emily Birnbaum for more. Great piece. And at this moment, how are we already seeing AI sort of becoming involved in campaigns already?
We absolutely are. We're seeing it from the local level, the state level, and we're definitely seeing it at the federal and international level. So there have been instances of pretty convincing deep fakes, so that is pictures and videos that aren't real but look very real, circulating in campaigns, up and down the board.
We're also, though, of course, going to sort of supercharge not only potential disinformation, but go supercharge the workers who are trying to activate campaigns as well. How are we already seeing sort of productivity being amped up at the moment?
Yeah, so for the Big Take piece that I published today, Laura Davison and I talked with congressional staffers, campaign staffers, lobbyists, and politicians, so the people who make up Washington, and asked them, how are you using AI? And we found it's already being used in a really widespread way. So lobbyists are using it to create the first drafts of campaigns. Congressional staffers are using it just to get the first draft on a page of speeches. The generative AI still isn't sophisticated enough to write bills, but we're not that far off.
Okay, so look, there are some positives to all of this, but Washington in and of itself is also eyeing AI and the regulation of AI pretty seriously. Can they tackle its own influence within their own sphere of political campaigns?
Yeah, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer just today said that this is going to be one of the most difficult challenges that Congress has ever faced, is trying to regulate this very complicated and nascent technology. They're right now just sort of in the talking phase. They're having briefings to get lawmakers up to speed with what AI is, how it's being used by our federal agencies, and how it's being deployed by the tech sector. So we're still very early on, but they really don't want to repeat the mistakes that they made with social media, where they were kind of asleep at the wheel. Social media grew and grew, and now it's pretty much an unregulated space.
Emily Birnbaum, great big take. Go read it online, or if you're lucky enough to have a terminal. Thank you very much indeed. Meanwhile, look, coming up, we're talking gaming. More on that Microsoft Activision deal and what it means for Sony, competitor next. This is Bloomberg Technology. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in New York. Let's get a check on these markets halfway through this trading day. And look, we're feeling buoyant, mainly because of the macro picture. The inflation coming in at a slower pace than had been anticipated. Clearly now back to that 3% level. It's still not at the Fed target, but it has come down significantly, lowest in a couple of years. The Nasdaq gets higher, up some 0.8%. Big tech on top. We see the 2-year yield screeching down some 14 basis points as perhaps we start to factor out any further rate hikes past that July date that we're anticipating one. Bitcoin actually lower versus the dollar, even though we did see some dollar weakness on the news of the inflation report. So we're off by about a third, but still above that $30,000 level. Let's move it on, have a look at some of the individual names because, well, as we've been seeing, actually a little bit of a change of tune of Activision Blizzard. Yesterday, we ramped higher as we got the news that the US court had, for now, not stalled on the deal to be purchased by Microsoft. So perhaps just giving away a little bit of that profit that was taken yesterday. We're seeing off by 1.3%. But Microsoft, actually one of the big points contributors to the Nasdaq today. Palo Alto Networks, interestingly, Microsoft unfolding some new cybersecurity offerings, and people worried about how that's going to affect Palo Alto Networks and indeed Zscaler and the like. We're off by more than 7%, so big hit in terms of competition there. Lucid Group too, off by 12%. Look, the amount of deliveries of its latest EVs in the previous quarter, or the second quarter, just did not live up to expectations. Meanwhile, we want to talk a little bit more about Microsoft and Activision Blizzard. We can start with perhaps the way in which gamers are being affected. We're worried about competition. Who are playing the games? Hispanic, Black Americans are actually playing video games more than other ethnic groups might have been considered. It's according to an annual study. This changes that stereotype that largely it's white Americans that are the industry's most enthusiastic consumers. Joining us on this, and indeed the deal more broadly for Activision and the competition out there, Bloomberg's Cecilia D'Anastasio. We're so pleased to have you in the studio. And first of all, debunk some myths for us. Who are playing these games? Who is worried? Who is anxious about how they get access to Call of Duty?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is true, the stereotype is true that most gamers are white and men. 72% of gamers are white men. However, white Americans are not the most likely people to be playing games in the US. A new study from the Entertainment Software Association showed that Americans who are Latino, who are Black, who are Asian American are significantly more likely than white Americans to be playing video games like Call of Duty.
We've known that more women are playing in various, whether it's on mobile or on console. Is that being reflected in the games? Is there more diversity within the characters that are being played?
About half of gamers are women, that's true. And increasingly, gaming companies are realizing that it's productive to their bottom line to make games that really appeal to a wider audience than traditional. And so we're seeing more protagonists in AAA games, these blockbuster games, who are women, who are non-white. And that's something that's been really celebrated widely across the gaming industry and also brought a lot of new gamers into the fold.
Let's talk about whose console you might be playing. And what's been so interesting as we go through the twists and the turns of the Microsoft Activision deal is it seems as though basically Sony's stranglehold on consoles has in large part been why Microsoft's allowed to make this deal, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Microsoft has argued for a long time that it's had a third place in the console wars, the so-called console wars between Sony, its PlayStation, Nintendo, its Switch, and then Microsoft with its Xbox console. And Microsoft has been working very hard to diversify outside of just its console business, including through its PC gaming offering, the Xbox app on PC, and also cloud gaming, which allows people to play Microsoft's games across mobile devices, tablets, smart TVs. And at the same time, what the FTC determined yesterday is that actually when it comes to Call of Duty, Microsoft isn't really incentivized to block off the game from competitors like Sony, because Microsoft actually in a large way relies on Sony consumers, PlayStation gamers, to play Call of Duty with people on Xbox.
So for now, clearly in their interest. Great to have you. Thank you for breaking it all down. Cecilia D'Anastasio with all that great reporting. Meanwhile, let's stick on the deal, on whether or not Microsoft is eventually going to be able to get its hands on Activision for sure. Britain's antitrust watchdog said that a new merger investigation into that $69 billion deal may be needed to reverse its previous veto. Joining us now for more about this is Public Knowledge Policy Director and Competition, Charlotte Slayman. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for joining us. And of course, you have a history of working with the FTC. You understand some of the concerns around competition. When you saw that particularly the judge in the US in San Francisco had given the clear for now, in the US at least, what did you think?
It's a disappointing result for consumers. Once the FTC brought this case, we were really hoping that it was going to be a win on the preliminary injunction. I do think the FTC might continue to fight the case, but this is certainly a loss.
Okay, interesting. And whereas many have felt that actually, even though the FTC lost in this way, they have managed to force the hand of Microsoft to make some changes, and indeed so have UK regulators. Do you think, why don't you, for example, think that that's been enough?
Yes, and there's also a settlement in the European Union where they're going to be giving some licenses for other cloud gaming services to be able to use Call of Duty. So that's great, that's progress, but we would still be concerned about the competitive impacts of the merger. It's not just about Call of Duty, it's also about the next big game. And I'm concerned about independent gamers, independent game studios having the same opportunities to reach customers, and for those gamers to have access to those games. So there are going to be broader anti-competitive impacts that we're concerned about, and I think Call of Duty isn't the only thing that needs to be fixed.
And of course, as you mentioned, deal isn't yet done. FTC could appeal. We also know that the UK, they might have to start from basically scratch, once again coming with different ways in which they could alleviate the previous veto to the deal. What could they do you think, Charlotte, to alleviate some of those concerns that you have?
Well, I think it would be very difficult to address this merger with behavioral remedies with a settlement. I think that's still on the table, but those settlements are often time limited. The settlement in the European Union is for 10 years. Now, a lot can happen in 10 years. There could be innovation and new competitors coming up. But I think about past mergers where we've seen a 10-year settlement agreement, and that 10 years actually ends up going by really fast, and then consumers are left with a more consolidated market. So I think enforcers need to be really careful in making sure that they're only agreeing to a settlement that is really going to solve the problem.
And sort of herein lies, if you look at history, what the FTC is trying to do. They're almost trying to unwind the shift of this particular regulatory authority in the way in which it views deals, in the way in which it views the adverse effects of oligopolies or monopolies or size and scale, because it isn't just all about consumer and prices. It's about more than that, it feels like, for the current guys of the FTC. Are they going about this? Is Lina Khan, to put it bluntly, going about this the right way to take on these big deals, try and take big hits and then be losing them?
Well, of course, it would be better to win. But when you take on those big, hard cases, you're going to have some losses. And I think, we all know that is part of what may end up being a long process. I've been really frustrated that Congress hasn't gotten more involved. Because that is what we really need. These cases are showing that the law isn't where it needs to be. And so we really need Congress to be able to act. There was so much attention and excitement about antitrust in Congress last year, and it didn't come to fruition. They didn't pass any new antitrust legislation except to give more funding to the agencies. We really need stronger antitrust laws in the U.S. to be able to have competitive markets.
Some would say they
but that's
are
on
stronger.
Congress.
potentially in the UK. What model do you want to see? What changes from a legal perspective?
Yes. So in particular with this case, it seemed like the court got tripped up on the idea of a vertical merger. So it's not a traditional horizontal merger where maybe a game studio is buying a game studio. This was a provider of consoles, subscription services, and cloud gaming buying a game studio. So the court saw it as a vertical merger and talked a lot about how vertical mergers may have pro-competitive benefits and are rarely stopped. But that is not the same as having a presumption in the law in favor of vertical mergers. Vertical mergers can be illegal under antitrust law. But it's clear from this judge and others that that needs to be more clear. The FTC is working right now on new merger guidelines, and I think that will be an opportunity for them to educate judges and make this more clear that vertical mergers can be really harmful. But that's also an area that Congress could help with.
Could that not just be politicized, though? Because many would see this as a relatively Democrat-heavy FTC.
Well, certainly there are no Republican commissioners at the FTC right now, but I think, again, that's on the Republicans in Congress who need to move forward with that. But there has been a lot of bipartisan interest, especially last Congress. There were multiple bipartisan bills that passed through the Judiciary Committee with bipartisan votes. So I think Republicans are also interested in antitrust enforcement, and they're recognizing that that's actually how we get a free market functioning correctly.
Charlotte, it's great to get your take. Thank you so much, of course, your previous expertise while working the FTC and now with Public Knowledge and Policy Director there. Charlotte Slayman, thank you. Coming up,
thank you.
Let's discuss how American Express is trying to take on the world with the help of some fintechs. More on that next with Amex's Raymond Joba. This is Bloomberg. It's been 4 years since American Express claimed its cards are now accepted at just as many places as rivals Visa and MasterCard right here in the US. But it's now looking to do something very similar overseas. And to that end, it's been partnering with some of the world's biggest fintech companies, the latest being WorldPay, which will help it sign and manage new merchants to accept American Express more broadly in the United Kingdom. American Express Group President of Global Merchant and Network Services, that's Raymond Joba, joins us now for more. Raymond, you are the man who basically goes around getting merchants to take Amex. And look, this must be a big deal to get WorldPay. Has this been the theme to ensure that the likes of Stripe and the likes of Square are enabling my ability to use Amex in the UK?
Not only in the UK, Caroline, but around the globe. Partnerships with third-party processors and fintechs like Square, Stripe, and Adyen, WorldPay, they really have been helping to fuel our growth. They represent 80% of the merchants that we have on our network and represent 20% of the overall volume, but it's growing really, really rapidly and gives card members far more confidence to pull out their card at the point of sale and feel comfortable that it'll be accepted.
Fintechs have really therefore managed to sort of accelerate this, but it's also been an on-the-ground getting salespeople in front of certain types of merchants to bring them round to using Amex. How has that role gone? What kind of companies, what kind of sellers are coming to your platform?
Well, we started on this journey a number of years ago in response to our card members. Our origins are primarily around travel and entertainment. And what we recognize is our card members wanted to use their cards far more places. We provide rich incentives for them to use it. And in response to that, we needed to move into everyday spend categories, a lot of smaller shops and retail. And as we started down that journey, we deployed what we call a hybrid acquiring model. That means our proprietary teams sign and manage the largest merchants, let's say the 25% of the merchants that represent 80% of our volume. And then we deployed partners, both traditional third-party processors as well as fintechs, to go out and sign and manage that long tail. And it's been a terrific growth story. Since 2018, we've more than tripled the number of locations that are accepting American Express. And that gives card members far more confidence to pull out their card. And we have the desire to eliminate the question, do you accept American Express?
And not
we're
just
well on the way to that.
not just in luxury places, which often sometimes you think of a more, well, lucrative, higher earner, higher spender using Amex, but you're going to discount stores, you're going to cobblers in the UK, key cutters to get them to accept Amex. And to that end, how much has data been driving this? How much has technology almost been the driver of where you go, where you put your resources to work?
Well, data is one of the things that makes American Express unique. We both issue the cards, many of the cards that our card members carry, as well as we have direct relationships with merchants, and that creates a tremendous amount of data. And one of the universal truths that all businesses care about is they want to find new customers. And we can use that information and that data that we have to allow merchants to market into our premium high spending card members. And to your point, whether it's Tesco's or Timpson's here in the UK or many smaller merchants, everyday spend categories, we want to make sure that we have coverage everywhere where our card members want to spend, but also we can help them grow by allowing us to be a very, very efficient marketing channel so that they can market into our premium card member base and find new customers. And it's something we call Amex Offers, and it's powered by the unique and rich data that we have by being both the issuer of the cards and having those direct relationships with merchants.
Why do this now, Raymond, when we're thinking about an economy that's a little bit tougher, when we're thinking about people spending in a more different manner? Why make this drive? Why make this commitment to be more overseas in your manner?
Well, two things. First, in response to our card members. Our card members wanted to be able to use their card in far more places, so we started down this journey in the U.S., as you mentioned, to reach parity. That meant in the U.S., 99% of the merchants that accept credit cards now accept American Express. And internationally, we wanted to make sure we were in the places where our card members live, work, and travel to. So we focused the teams on some very important international cities, and we've made material progress. As I mentioned, we've more than tripled the number of locations that accept American Express since 2018. And we continue to have upside above that. And now's a great time to do it. And American Express has been around for 173 years. We've been through all types of cycles. We're operating in a cyclical environment. And good economies or bad economies, we know we need more coverage and give our card members greater confidence to pull out their card at the point of sale.
Raymond Jobal, great to have some time with you. Thank you. Let you get back to work in the UK. American Express Group President of Global Merchant and Network Services. We appreciate the time. Meanwhile, coming up, we will go back to Sun Valley, where tech and media executives coming together, doing what they do, hobnobbing, smiling for the cameras, talking about everything, chips, trade, you name it, media, entertainment, deals. Here's what Paramount CEO Bob Bakish thinks about the summer box office this year.
We're feeling great about it. We're opening MI7 this weekend. It's a great film. Tracking out, it's awesome. And it's a thrill ride, so you're going to have a lot of fun watching it.
Look, I'm really proud to be here at Amberley today. I want to say thank you very much to Ambassador. Thank you very much for being here today, sir. It's a great honour to be here. You're a great friend of Australia, and we're very proud that you're here and that we're able to work very closely with the Ukrainians and to answer the call of the Ukrainian President Zelensky to have these Bushmasters dispatched to the Ukraine as quickly as possible. Ambassador Miroshnichenko has been a very significant presence already, and he has conveyed the messages of the Ukrainian government in a very effective way. So very happy to work with him. I'm also very pleased to be here with Major General Scott Winter, who's been instrumental in pulling all of this together. We're going to gift 20 Bushmasters to the Ukraine, and the idea will be to provide that support to keep people safe and to repel the Russians as quickly as possible from the Ukrainian territory. So I might hand you over to the Ambassador now, and then we're happy to take any questions from there.
On behalf of President Zelensky and on behalf of all the Ukrainian people, I would like to thank Australian government and Australian people for this gift of 20 Bushmasters. It's going to be of great help to our personnel, military personnel in Ukraine, as well as there is one ambulance vehicle which will be extremely helpful for us. Ukraine is a like-minded country for Australia. We do now understand, and myself, I've just arrived 2 weeks ago, the concept of mateship. I think that The president's call to help us with this kind of vehicles was received in less than a day. And in Ukraine, it was still the same day. He asked for the Bushmasters in the morning. He got a confirmation by the end of the day that he would get them. And I think this is this mateship that we now understand and the support we appreciate. Ukraine is going through very difficult times. The number of military and civilian casualties is staggering. The war crimes of the Russian military is appalling. And we do need to prop up our military capabilities to be able to repel the Russians, to be able to protect the sovereignty and integrity of our country. And we are very pleased that Australia is helping us with that. We do hope we'll be able to force Russians out of the country, that we can get back to normal life, that we can get back to the reconstruction of the country, and we can focus on rebuilding the country. Thank you.
Okay, happy to take any questions. Well, the strength of the Bushmaster is its design, and the V-shaped hull, as you know, was very beneficial to us in the Middle East, and for 20 years we were involved there, and we've watched a lot of tragedy unfold. Soldiers injured in theatre, American soldiers, for example, and others in vehicles that weren't just up to what was required. And the Bushmaster with the V-shaped hull allows an explosion for that energy to be dispersed and for the crew inside to have the best possible chance of survival. So it's not a tank, it can't forward deploy to the front line, but it can move people around, and particularly when we're seeing reports of Russian forces laying landmines, etc. This would be a very crucial element of keeping troops safe and movements of people, etc. But it's served us very well. We've got a great relationship with Thales, and I want to say thank you very much to the men and women at Thales who have quickly painted and prepared 20 of these vehicles to be dispatched, and the first 3 will be in the air today. Overall, it'll cost about $50 million, so over north of $2 million a piece. And again, the technology and the design, the structural steel that's involved in this is quite phenomenal. Yeah, so in our fleet, we have about 1,000 Bushmasters, and we can work with Thales to replace these that are being sent away. So there's no impact on our operational needs or requirements. And we've got just fortuitous actually that we had a number that we could get quickly painted and dispatched.
How will the Bushmasters be getting from where they're dropped in Europe to the Ukraine?
Well, not something that we comment on. As I said before, we've already sent a number of loads of defence material, of support and equipment to the Ukraine, and we're able to stage that into Europe and then get it in country from there with our partners.
Is much training required to operate?
No, there's not. Particularly in extremis. I mean, we ideally would have trainers there, and we would go through a program with the Ukrainian forces, but that's not possible during a conflict. So Defence, I think, has shown their usual ingenuity and innovation. They've put together a video in their language and in the Ukrainian language, and they've allowed the training to take place virtually. So I think that's pretty remarkable, and people will be trained up within a matter of hours to be able to drive these vehicles.
Can you tell us much about what happened, I guess, behind the scenes after the press was made? How was that able to happen so quickly, and how did that proceed?
Well, obviously, we had been talking within the National Security Committee about what additional support we could provide. We want the Russians out of the Ukraine as quickly as possible. We want to protect and defend the women and children of the Ukraine. We want the war crimes to stop, and the equipment that we've been able to provide over a number of weeks now has met the requests of the Ukrainian government. it's also dovetailed into the support that's been provided by our allies, and we've coordinated very closely with them. We looked, once President Zelensky had made the request, at what stocks we had available. I spoke to the Chief of the Defence Force and we were able to identify that we could send 20. And the Prime Minister and I worked very closely together on what the number should be, how quickly we could send them, and we're just determined to get them out of the country into the Ukraine as quickly as possible. There'll be there are 3, not 4, on this flight, and that's to do, I'm told, with other equipment that's on board, with fuel load, etc. So we'll have a drumbeat probably of about every 4 or 5 days, and there may be other commercial options that become available to us that aren't there at the moment, but they'll be in the whole. The 20 will be in within the next few weeks. If there's a requirement to provide more support, then Australia is prepared to consider all of that. There's obviously been a lot of humanitarian support that we've provided. There'll also be a big ask of the developed world to contribute to the rebuild within the Ukraine, the shelling of residential areas, the destruction of facilities, of government buildings, of all of that infrastructure, which has been the second tragedy, followed of obviously by the human tragedy. It'll take a lot of money and support to rebuild, and Australia will be there with Ukraine during that stage as well. And we hope that we can get through the war stage into the rebuild stage as quickly as humanly possible. Well, Australia, as I said before, is a country that's benefited greatly from working with allies and sticking together with countries of similar values around the world. We've fought alongside our allies over many decades, and we'll continue to do that because we can't take what we have in our country for granted. And war criminals need to be held to account. And the ICC and other bodies have the potential to investigate, and I'm sure that evidence is being put together at the moment. So all we would urge is that if there is evidence of war crimes, then action is taken against Russia as quickly as possible. We want to see the Ukraine back to normal, as the ambassador says, and we want to see women and children and men getting back to their way of life in the Ukraine. That's the want of Australia. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Ambassador, we know that this sort of capability allowed Ukrainian forces to sort of pivot from a defensive operation to an offensive operation to reclaim some of the country that Ukrainian forces have lost. Is that your understanding as to what's happening? How important is that to?
I'm not sure I'm not sure that you understand it correctly. This is not used for, and we have Major General Winter. He can comment on how this vehicle is being used, but it's primarily used for the transport of personnel, and it's protected against the landmines which are out there. And of course, because there is one which is equipped as an ambulance, we'll be able to transport those who are wounded from the battlefield. The Russian military has mined big parts of Ukraine. As they have withdrawn from the northern part of Kiev, this whole area is now very dangerous. I have to tell you that as they were withdrawing from Bucha in Irpin, they even been leaving booby traps in private houses where they stayed. They've left some explosives with the dead bodies so that more casualties are out there. So it's just, and we have to deal with that. We have to demine, and we have to also move our people. So these kind of vehicles will be very handy for this purposes.
What kind of support like this, what kind of impact does that have on Ukrainian people, the morale?
It's a very strong sign of support. Many countries are now sending weapons, equipment, air defense systems. Some even have sent their tanks to Ukraine. We of course need more of that, and but every time there is a shipment like this, that's received very well within the Ukrainian armed forces. It boosts their morale. It helps them see that the world is supporting them, and it really feels good to be here right now and with you to be witnessing this. I have to tell you yes, and the reason is very simple, is that Ukraine cannot change its geography. We're always going to have Russia next door. And we now, of course, have to protect our integrity and sovereignty. So we need to kick them out of Ukraine. But to move forward, we really need to have very strong and capable military forces to be able to defend ourselves in the future.
Ready for the next act? Your next act is on the way to becoming an absolute superstar. Give it up for the amazing Aaron Shen!
Hey, hello, how's it going? Yeah, sick. So a lot of people have been talking about how Russia's been meddling with the elections. Start big. A lot of people have been talking about how Russia's been meddling with the elections, but no one's been talking about how I've been meddling with the elections. Because what's been happening is I found out what my dad's YouTube password is, right? And what I've gone and done is I've logged in, and I've started clicking on videos that are more similar to my politics than his politics. And I've been slowly but subtly changing the algorithm, so he'll get recommended videos that I'd normally watch. So now it's getting recommended videos like why we should let the refugees in, and all the races are equal, and how to say I love you to your son. But I got this thing where my nipples can't be exposed for too long. They either got to be covered by shirt or by water. Otherwise, I get quite hypersensitive in the open air. They get quite ticklish. I'd say it's my biggest weakness, but never say that at a job interview. I try to exploit it, take my shirt, make me work overtime. But I was reading my book during the in-flight safety demonstration on the airplane, right? I was reading it, it was so good, I was getting into the world and everything. But then a flight attendant came up to me and she was like, hey, do you mind putting that book down and paying attention to the in-flight safety demonstration? And I looked her dead in the eyes and I was like, not to brag, but I am actually quite an experienced flyer. I have heard the in-flight safety demonstration, like ages ago, like years ago, I get it. No Game Boys, and if you want to smoke, go to the toilet. But I love being in Sydney. I've been lapping up the culture. So good, you've been yeah. Been lapping up the culture. It's been so good. I was at an art gallery. I got there in the morning, so it was quite empty when I got there. But I found myself staring at a nude artwork for quite some time. But as I stopped staring at it, I found that the room had filled up with quite a few patrons. So I had to proceed to stare at a non-nude artwork for a similar length. Pretend that I was into art. So now I'm staring at this red cube, hoping no one asks me what I think of it and why I've got an erection. Sorry. But I do have my full licence. Do the learner's test, right? And in New South Wales, in the learner's handbook, there's a section on three-point turns. And one of the paragraphs in that section, it starts with the sentence, "Don't be ashamed to turn off onto a quiet street to do three-point turns." Now, I didn't even know that was even a thing associated with shame. Like, up until that point, I'd done most of my three-point turns on quiet streets. But since finding that out, now I've got to do them on motorways. Have been driving a lot, though. Been driving so much, I got a nail in one of my tyres. Couldn't believe it. Had to go to the mechanics, right? But mechanics are the last profession that can still roast you to your face. You know what I mean? Like, I drove up the ramp, opened the door, and I walked up to him, and the first thing he says to me is like, "Mate, you've come to the wrong place for a haircut." Which is pretty brutal, but also quite a high quality for someone not in the industry. So good on him. But I have got a haircut since, so it's quite brutal that you guys laugh. Got a haircut since that. I was sitting in the hairdresser's chair, right, and I was trying to explain this haircut to her, but she wasn't really understanding my vision. But I have actually come into a bit of success lately. Thank you. Strange guy. I have come into a bit of success lately, but what that means practically is that if you put my name into Google Images, first 3 rows, that's me. So imagine the audacity of this. I'm sitting in the hairdresser's chair. I put my own name into Google Images, and lo and behold, 2 rows down, 3 across, there's the haircut. Right, I've had the haircut before. So I click on the photo, and she's looking at it. But at this point, I don't look like how I look in the photo because my hair's grown even more unruly. You know what I mean? It's masking a lot of my prominent features. So she wouldn't have recognised that it was me in the photo. She would have just thought that I was an Aaron Chen fan. But you should have seen her face at the end of the haircut. She was looking at the phone, then she looked back up at me, then she looked back down at the phone, and she was like, "Hold on. Are you sure you want this haircut?" I'll finish on that. Good on you guys. Thank you.
It was clear already before the NATO summit in Vilnius that the door was not open to Ukraine to join the alliance anytime soon. But at least it's clearer now what Ukraine can expect as the U.S. and its allies unveiled new security assurances designed to bolster Ukraine against Russia. Ukraine is disappointed its aspirations of NATO membership is off the cards for now, but President Zelensky welcomed what he called a meaningful success and a significant victory for Ukraine. But as the war continues in Ukraine, the shape of the future remains quite uncertain, and that's where U.S. President Biden stepped in, laying out his vision for the future.
The defense of freedom is not the work of a day or a year. It's the calling of our lifetime. Of all time. We are steeled for the struggle ahead. Our unity will not falter, I promise you. Folks, as I look around the world today at a moment of war and peril, a moment of competition and uncertainty, I also see a moment of unprecedented opportunity. Unprecedented opportunity. Opportunity to make real strides toward a world of greater peace and greater prosperity, liberty and dignity, equal justice under the law, human rights and fundamental freedoms, which are the blessing and birthright of all of humanity. That is the world the United States is working toward. And it's one we'll only reach if we do it together. And I mean together. We need to take the same spirit of unity, common purpose, determination that we've demonstrated in our response to Russian aggression in Ukraine and bring more partners along as we continue working to build a world we want to live in and a world we want for our children.
For more on this, we can now speak to Raphael Bossong from the German Institute of International and Security Affairs. Welcome. What's your biggest takeaway from Biden's speech today?
Well, I think the speech was just to round off, like to sort of reassure people. And as you already sort of shown, the main message is, of course, we don't waver. So, well, we'll see what happens in 24 when the next American elections are. But as long as he's in charge, America stays the course. And I think that's the main message.
Ukraine has not been offered membership, and it's widely believed that the U.S. as well as Germany are the major players standing in the way of that. But they're also Ukraine's biggest providers of aid. So what's the logic behind this?
Well, the official argument is that, the aid is what matters now. I mean, the offensive is going on right now, and everybody agrees that Ukraine can't join while the war is going on. So drawing that war to a most successful conclusion, what's possible, that's the priority now. So that's the official line. Of course, behind that, the U.S. is ultimately really calling the shots. I don't want to kind of pull Germany out of the line of critique or responsibility, but really, ultimately, it's up for the U.S. to say when and how they're ready to take up this credible commitment for actually really standing up, ultimately also with this nuclear arsenal for the defense of Ukraine. So that's something I can understand is not taken lightly. While other military aid is flowing in.
So is it fair to say that the national interests of the United States and Germany align in this case, or is the motivation a different one?
They align. I mean, every country has obviously a different perspective, and I think the American decision, while taken from further afar and obviously having a different relationship to Russia than Germany, is in the way ultimately more weighty and sort of important. But yes, I mean, I don't think that Germany, of course, has a very important voice here, but Scholz has been saying for months and months, and to the annoying many people, that it's all in conjunction with other allies and following. And I think in this case, also the US wasn't too unhappy that they had one backer and that not everybody would point at the US saying they are dragging their feet.
Now that you bring up Chancellor Scholz, let's listen to some of what he said today.
We have taken very good decisions regarding Ukraine. In the documents that NATO has agreed on here, that can be seen in various aspects. First, we did it unanimously. Secondly, the Ukrainian president praised the overall decisions taken here today. And it's also quite clear, the question of NATO membership will not be an issue that is subject to negotiation for those who are not part of this partnership. Russia will not take part in these negotiations. I think that's very clear.
All right, so let's unpack this because there's a lot to unpack. Isn't it a little disingenuous of him to say that Ukraine left the summit happy when just a day ago, this man, Volodymyr Zelensky, was venting on Twitter saying that it's absurd how NATO is behaving?
Well, I mean, this is diplomacy. I mean, we also know that the Ukrainian government and Zelensky are, getting results by being pushy, but then there was a bit of a pushback just the last day and a half. And now they're obviously all sides are signaling we're on the same page after all. So this is not a serious rift that we have seeing here. But of course, yes, Ukraine would have been happier if there had been a clear timetable and some more like really bold steps than that we've seen now. But at the same time, of course, and this was expected, this commitment by the G7 is significant, and hopefully this broad outline and the promise of bilateral, more concrete commitments will be fleshed out in the coming days.
Then let's look at what he said about Russia, that Russia is not part of the negotiation of whether or not Ukraine can join NATO. But isn't the reality that the fact that Ukraine cannot join NATO very much depends on what Russia is doing right now?
Yeah, and I mean, the whole war, at least in Russian argument, is that, well, we started this because we didn't want Ukraine to join.
Exactly.
And Ukraine was already in line in 2008 and wasn't joining because of Russian, well, red lines, supposedly. So, of course, Russia is part of the equation. I think, well, one can interpret a lot in this kind of statement, but the critical question is, and there has been suspicion that there weren't, the US and also Germany were more hesitant because they wanted to keep this as a bargaining chip once there was a ceasefire. And this is signaling, well, no, we don't think about it in these terms. Whether this will actually hold up, of course, will be shown when it comes to it.
Messaging, exactly.
But this is the subtext here.
What do you make of the official messaging and the interpretation that this might be a bargaining chip? And Ukraine is, of course, not happy about the position it finds itself in that.
Well, Zelensky said something else, saying it's clear no territory is up for being traded. I don't know his literal words, it was translated from Ukrainian, but basically saying if there's one village with one person living in it, we're not ready to trade it for anything. And so I think this was the counter pitch in a say to say, we're, of course, principally open to negotiation, but we are not ready to be sold out in terms of territory. He didn't speak explicitly about NATO. NATO said Ukraine's future is in NATO. So it's also a statement. It's not something to lightly, but the pacing and the speed, yes, that is up for negotiation. And I think in that sense, well, yes, Russia remains a part of the equation, to be fair.
Let's talk about the temperature here in Germany. How much longer can Germany keep up its support for Ukraine when maybe the war is seen as a more destabilizing element than the threat posed by Russia to Germany directly?
Well, I think the public support is still pretty strong. I mean, there are, of course, always competing demands, public spending, et cetera, et cetera. But this earlier worry that really public support would crumble, that there will be a winter of discontent, et cetera, this is really off the table. And I think in that sense, we can really count on Germany staying the course. There is, of course, always disagreement among various politicians and parties on how much and how fast, and many people would have taken a more bold step, and Scholz is his usual self, trying to be the calm, I'm in control, but, you know, being a bit more cautious type. But I think overall, this is pretty clear. And the bigger question really is, ultimately, hopefully the US will stay on course next year. And I think there are good reasons to think so. There are also many Republicans who want to stay the course. But yes, this is really the big factor. Will the next US presidential election be just a bump in the road, or will this really throw everything into question again?
Raphael Grossam from the German Institute of International and Security Affairs. Thank you so much for your time.
Welcome.
Let's dig a little deeper and bring in Rachel Rizzo. She's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. She joins us from Vilnius. Welcome to the program. That was quite an energetic speech from Biden, wasn't it? What did you make of it?
It was. I mean, I think what he said was very clear, and the message that he wanted to send was exactly what he said, that they are going to stand with Ukraine for liberty, for freedom, for as long as it takes. I think a lot of people weren't really sure what to expect when Biden got onto stage, maybe talking just about NATO, about the importance of the U.S.-European alliance. But as you heard, it went far, far further than that. He talked not just about Ukraine, but also about the safety of the world order in general.
From everything we have heard at the summit and leading up to the summit, would you say NATO allies are serious about bringing Ukraine into the fold someday in an undefined future?
I think someday in an undefined future is sort of the key phrase there. I think Zelensky wanted more than he got from this NATO summit here in Vilnius. He wanted not just the promise that Ukraine will eventually join, but he wanted a clear timeline. He wanted more than NATO gave Ukraine back in 2008, where they made a similar promise saying that Ukraine would eventually join, but gave them no clear pathway as to how or when. But this promise this time comes along with much stronger security guarantees, economic guarantees, and the promise of long-term security promises. So that is all good news for him. So I think both sides can walk away happy.
Does NATO plan on extending a formal invitation to Ukraine at some point, though? Why is it so hard to define a timeline for a future after the war?
So as many people have mentioned, bringing Ukraine into NATO right now is a no-go because of Article 5, which is the alliance's mutual security guarantee. It basically would create a scenario where NATO brings itself into the war. So
but that's also not what Ukraine is asking for. Ukraine is always talking about a scenario where this war has ended.
Exactly. So if the war ends and we're looking, say, 5 or 10 years down the road and Ukraine does get an invitation to NATO and say Russia invaded again, then NATO allies would be obligated by treaty at that point to go to war with and alongside Ukraine. And I think that is still perhaps a difficult pill for many NATO allies to swallow. Obviously, Poland and the Baltics, they see this as existential. They want Ukraine in NATO as soon as the war ends. As we saw from this summit, Germany and the U.S. are still a little bit timid as to a promise of an exact timeline. This is a consensus alliance. All 31, hopefully soon to be 32 members with Sweden have to guarantee to big decisions like this.
Do you see any missed opportunities at this summit?
So I think that there are some missed opportunities, maybe for those who were really, really pushing for stronger language. You know, when you come out with communiques from a summit like this, you sort of have to agree upon lowest common denominator language. And that's why a lot of the communiques that come out can seem a little bit watered down. And really the meat of the security guarantees, especially for Ukraine, is found in other statements like the G7, like the things that different bilateral countries have said. And so the missed opportunity, I think, it could potentially be for a clear timeline. But again, these are very, very difficult things to get 31 allies to agree on. So you know, the 75th anniversary summit will be in Washington next year. Let's just see what happens then.
All right. Rachel Rizzo from the Atlantic Council, thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
Now, something else a lot of you are aware of. Those of you with illegal cable hookups will be aware of the fact that one of the things I like to do in my shows is complain. You know, it's kind of a motif for me, complaining. And of course, this weird culture we live in leaves you no shortage of things to complain about. So this next piece of material, like most good ideas, is fairly simple. It's just a list of people who ought to be killed. Starting with these people who read self-help books. Why do so many people need help? Life is not that complicated. You get up, you go to work, you eat 3 meals, you take 1 good shit, and you go back to bed. What's the fucking mystery? And the part I really don't understand, if you're looking for self-help, why would you read a book written by somebody else? That's not self-help, that's help. There's no such thing as self-help. If you did it yourself, you didn't need help. You did it yourself. Try to pay attention to the language we've all agreed on. And a similar mystery to me, motivation books, motivation seminars. Why would anyone need to be motivated by someone else? I say if you lack motivation, a seminar isn't going to help you. What you really need is to be smashed in the head 30 or 40 times with a golf club. That'll fucking motivate you. Or else it'll at least get you up and moving around the room. You know, locate your socks, shit like that. Get the day rolling. Motivation is bullshit. If you ask me, this country could use a little less motivation. The people who are motivated are the ones who are causing all the trouble. Stock swindlers, serial killers, child molesters, Christian conservatives. These people are highly motivated. Highly motivated. You know? And anyway, I think motivation is overrated. You show me some lazy prick who's lying around all day watching game shows and stroking his penis, and I'll show you someone's not causing any fucking trouble, okay? All right. Here's another pack of low-grade morons who ought to be locked into portable toilets and set on fire. These people with bumper stickers that say, "We are the proud parents of an honor student at the Franklin School," you know? Or the Midvale Academy, or whatever other innocent-sounding name has been assigned to the indoctrination center where their child has been sent to be stripped of his individuality and turned into an obedient, soul-dead, conformist member of the American consumer culture. Proud parents. What kind of empty people need to validate themselves through the achievements of their children? How'd you like to have to live with a couple of these misfits? How's that science project coming along, Justin? Fuck you, Dad. You simple-minded prick. Mind your own business and pass the Cheerios. Here's a bumper sticker I'd like to see. "We are the proud parents of a child whose self-esteem is sufficient that he doesn't need us promoting his minor scholastic achievements on the back of our car." That would be pretty good. Or, "We are the proud parents of a child who has resisted his teacher's attempts to break his spirit and bend him to the will of his corporate masters." Just be nice a little for change, you know? Here's something realistic. We have a daughter in public school who hasn't been knocked up yet. We have a son in public school who hasn't shot any of his classmates yet. But he does sell drugs to your honor student. Plus, he knocked up your daughter. Then there are the people who aren't too proud of their children. We are the embarrassed parents of a cross-eyed little nitwit who at the age of 10 not only continues to wet the bed, but also shits on the school bus. Something like that on the back of the car might give the child a little more incentive, you know? Get him to try a little harder next semester. Here are some more parents who ought to be beaten with heavy clubs and left bleeding in the moonlight. These are the ones who carry their babies around in these backpacks or front packs or slings or whatever these devices are called that are apparently designed to leave the parents' hands free to sort through high-end merchandise and reach for their platinum credit cards. Because it's always these upscale, yuppie-looking Greenpeace, environmentally conscious assholes who have them on, you know? I say, "Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Natural Fibers." I say, "Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Natural Fibers. It's not camping equipment, it's a baby. Touch the little prick now and then. He'll thank you for it someday." These are the same people who sort their garbage, jog with their dogs, and listen to Steely Dan. You know? You just like to take them out deep into the forest and disembowel them with a wooden cooking spoon. Here are some more people who ought to be smashed across the face repeatedly with a piece of heavy mining equipment. These grown men who refer to their fathers as "my daddy." You know? Yeah. Gee, you hear a lot of this stupid shit in the South. These rebel assholes, you know? "My daddy, yeah, my daddy." Well, you know what my daddy used to say? My daddy used to say, blah, 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 blah. Oh, he did? Did he? Well, wasn't that fucking enlightening? My daddy used to say, "Fuck your daddy." Fuck your daddy. In his wrinkled, rustic, rural, country asshole. Grow up, Billy Joe, Carl, Bob, Danny, Frank. You're not 6 anymore. More like 9. Here's another unfortunate pack of mutants who ought to be penciled in for a sudden visit from the angel of death. These guys These guys who can't tell you about a phone call they had without giving you this shit. The fucking pinky and the thumb. Like they attended mime college. Studied under Marcel Marceau. So I call her up, you know? And I'm talking to her. And she fucking hangs up on me. So I hang up on her. And she calls me back. I fucking hang up again. I say, hey, Bruno, thanks for the visual aid. But we all understand the concept of the telephone. You hold it in your hand, you talk into it. Excuse me, Bruno, incoming call. Oh, hey, it's for you. Here's another bunch of puss-headed telephone cretins. These self-important techno dicks who walk around with these hands-free telephone headsets and earpieces. Mr. Self-Important doesn't want to be too far from the phone in case Henry Kissinger calls. He's got the Dalai Lama on line 2. I say, hey, spaceman, as long as your hands are free, reach over here and fondle my balls, would you please? And answering machines. Starting with these people who think it's cute to let their children record the outgoing message. You know? And you can't understand a word of it because the kid's a fucking imbecile. Hi, my name is Stacy. I'm 5 years old. My mommy and daddy aren't home. Here's my message, Stacy. I'm coming over to your house with a big knife. And I'm gonna kill mommy and daddy. Then I'm gonna peel off their skin and make a funny hat. After that, I'm gonna take out my huge ding-dong and stick it right in your... These are the same parents who at Christmas time send you pictures of their children. Pictures you didn't ask for and you don't want. But it is fun throwing the pictures away, isn't it? I don't even look at the fucking Christmas card. Who is this? Luann is 12 this year. Fuck Luann. I give a shit how old she is. Does she have any tits yet? Send me a picture of Luann's tits. Then I know I'm gonna have a happy new year, too. Then, just to compound your holiday pleasure, they enclose a family newsletter. Just what you're hoping for. News about people you can barely fucking remember. We're so proud of Brad, he's been accepted into dental school. Yeah, in the Philippines. After 4 tries. Fuck Brad and everybody who looks like Brad. Judging from his picture, I think he's jerking off too much. Keep him away from Luann. Here's another bunch of genetic defectives who've been turned loose on answering machines. These guys who cannot resist the urge to put music on their outgoing message. You know, some guy spends $8 at Radio Shack and suddenly he's a fucking record producer. And because he's busy in the basement jacking off his dog, I have to listen to substandard music. And it's always rotten music, you know? It's either new age, that pointless, meandering zombie noise played by pseudo-spiritual lunatics who think wind chimes are a musical instrument. Or else it's soft rock, that lame-ass, weak, non-threatening suburban white boy junk played by bands like Men Without Testicles. Oh, and folks, on these answering machines, do me a favor, would you please? When you record your outgoing message, don't bother telling me you can't come to the phone. I understand that. Apparently, that's why we have these machines. And don't tell me to leave my name and number. Somehow, I figured that out. And if you work in an office, never mind that stuff, I'm away from my desk. If you had to take a shit, say so. Just say, hi, this is Mary Louise. I had the Mexican jalapeno bean chili dip, and I washed it down with a gallon of gin. I'll be in and out all day. There are some more people who ought to be strapped into chairs and beaten with hammers. People who wear visors. Let me ask you something. What the fuck is the point in wearing half a hat? Either get a hat or don't. No one's interested in the top of your head. Go back to the store and tell them to give you the rest of the hat. They cheated you. Better still, get yourself one of them little Jewish hats and sew it to your visor. Then you got yourself a full-fledged fucking hat, my friend. Here are some more musical vermin whose mothers we wish had had medical plans that included abortion. These singers who think they're so special they only need one name. Bono, Sting, Jewel, Tiffany, Prince. What a crock of shit. Get a fucking last name, would you please? I got a nice two-word name for you. Pretentious cocksucker. How do you like that? Bono, Sting. It's not bad enough the music sucks, but with no last name, you can't find out where they live to throw a fucking bomb through their window. It's frustrating. Here are some more people who deserve an inoperable tumor at the base of their spines. These guys who fly around the world in a fucking balloon. You know, what is this, 1850? Get a fucking airline ticket, will you please? When are the media gonna realize no one's interested in some rich trouser stain who's so bored he's gotta fly around the balloon all day? I hope the next guy gets hit by lightning. It flies around in little fart circles. And lands in a sewage treatment pond and sinks with the rest of the turds. Mr. Lighter Than Air. Here is another pack of jack-offs who ought to be strangled in front of their children. People who pay for inexpensive items with a credit card. You know, folks, take my word for this. Raisinets is not a major purchase. Get some fucking cash together. No one should be paying a bank 18% interest on Tic Tacs. And you're holding up the fucking line, too. Some dorky-looking prick with a fanny pack waiting to be approved for a bag of cheese doodles. I need this like I need an infected scrotum. Get some fucking money. Next guy ahead of me online pays for Newsweek with a credit card is getting stabbed in the eyes. And I'm getting really sick of guys named Todd. You know, yeah, it's just a goofy fucking name, okay? Hi, what's your name? Todd. I'm Todd. And this is Blake and Blair and Blaine and Brent. Where are all these goofy fucking boys' names coming from? Taylor, Tyler, Jordan, Flynn. These are not real names. You want to hear a real name? Eddie. Eddie is a real name. Whatever happened to Eddie? He was here a minute ago. Joey and Jackie and Johnny and Phil, Bobby and Tommy and Danny and Bill. What happened? Todd and Cody and Dylan and Cameron and Tucker. Hi, Tucker. I'm Todd. Hi, Todd. I'm Tucker. Fuck Tucker. Tucker sucks. And fuck Tucker's friend, Kyle. Yeah. There's another soft name for a boy, Kyle. Soft names make soft people. I'll bet you anything that 10 times out of 10, Nikki, Vinny, and Tony will beat the shit out of Todd, Kyle, and Tucker. Thank you very much. Here are some more people with missing chromosomes who ought to be thrown screaming from a helicopter. Gun enthusiasts, you know? Oh yeah, I'm a gun enthusiast. Oh yeah, well I'm a blowjob enthusiast. You wanna see me shoot? Cock this and I'll discharge a load for you. And I'm not against guns. I'm not one of those mindless Hollywood cocksuckers. I'm not against guns. I'm not against bullets. I'm not even against people shooting each other. Shit, shooting somebody's part of the American dream. I don't care who it is. Parents, teachers, kids, fuck them. Let them get shot. Doesn't bother me. But speaking of mindless Hollywood cocksuckers, before Charlton Heston became president of these dickless lunatics in the NRA, they had a different guy. He's still one of their major spokesmen. His name is Wayne LaPierre. What kind of a name for a gun nut is Wayne LaPierre? Doesn't this sound a little fruity to you? Hi, I'm Wayne. I'm a gun person. Bang, bang. You know what this prick's name ought to be? Biff Webster. Spud Crowley, a man's name, Chuck Steak. Here are some more men who ought to be strapped to a gurney and castrated with fishing knives. White guys who shave their heads completely bald. You know? They're so ashamed they lost 11 hairs, they're going to try to turn it into some kind of a masculine statement. I say, hey, you goofy-looking, baldy-headed fuck. Looks good on black guys. On you, it's ugly, repulsive, and disgusting. You want to be bald? Do what I did. Wait a while. Yeah. Meantime, there's no excuse for running around looking like a freshly circumcised dick. And just to wind up this little group of complaints, finally, this is a group of social criminals. These people in the space program. Nassholes, I call them. In case you haven't heard, the latest disaster for the rest of the universe is that the United States is going to go to Mars. Okay? Oh, yeah. We're going to go to Mars. And then, of course, we're going to colonize deep space with our microwave hot dogs and plastic vomit, fake dog shit and cinnamon dental floss and lemon-scented toilet paper and sneakers with lights in the heels. And all these other impressive things we've done down here. But let me ask you this. What are we going to tell the Intergalactic Council of Ministers the first time one of our teenage mothers throws her newborn baby into a dumpster, huh? How are we going to explain that to the space people? How are we going to let them know that our ambassador was only late for the meeting because his breakfast was cold and he had to spend half an hour punching his wife around the kitchen? And what are they going to think when they find out it's just a local custom that over 80 million women in the third world have had their clitorises forcibly removed in order to reduce their sexual pleasure so they won't cheat on their husbands? Can't you just sense how eager the rest of the universe is for us to show up? Can't you see them out there? Thank you.
Excellencies, dear participants and dear friends, a very warm welcome to all of you to this high-level women's breakfast. The world is watching us. The alliance is taking important decisions for the future as Russia continues its war of aggression against Ukraine, bringing death and destruction to the heart of Europe. At this historic moment for transatlantic security, when we make Ukraine and the alliance even stronger, we also make our bonds stronger. Following the successful gathering of women ministers at last year's summit in Madrid, today we are getting again together to contribute to this discussion. This is a space that we have gained and that we can all be proud of. Because leadership matters. and women's leadership matters, and we would like to see more women across the alliance, even among NATO's leaders. But how can we leverage women's leadership? We have a collective responsibility to do more. We are here making the change that we seek, leading by example and inspiring women and girls to join us now and in the future. As we know, you can't be what you cannot see. Life is showing us how leadership manifests itself in a variety of ways, from politics to civil society. And this is why I'm particularly glad to have with us today a representative from civil society. Your strong leadership has paved the way for women's political representation and participation in peace and security matters. And you continue to be at the forefront of the women, peace and security agenda every day. In this critical time for our security and for international peace and stability, as we are facing multiple security challenges, our voices and leadership are vital. It is only through our diversity and inclusivity that we can get a comprehensive understanding of the world and find the right solutions for longer-lasting and more sustainable peace. This is why we are establishing here this unique space to exchange on imperative issues to transatlantic security. NATO is an alliance of democracies based on our common values, and at the same time, we are also building a new alliance between women leaders, political and non. Leadership matters, and I'm committed to continue to create and promote such spaces for dialogue. It is together that we can expand and enhance women's voices in peace and security. This summit is making Ukraine stronger as we set out a vision for its future and reaffirm that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. It is only with the inclusion of women's leadership and voices that this support will bring the change and results we want to achieve. I would like to thank Lithuania and all those who have worked hard to make this event happen. It is now with great pleasure that I give the floor to Victoria Čmilytė-Nilsen, Speaker of the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania. Victoria, the floor is yours.
Good morning to this distinguished audience. I'm so glad that we are meeting here today for this early working breakfast to discuss how we can empower women in the field of international security and foreign policy. I'm grateful to the NATO Secretary General's Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, Ms. Irene Fellin, for inviting me to co-host this breakfast and continue the tradition of convening women ministers for a special discussion. The topic of empowering women matters, as the credibility of the international structures depends, among other things, also on who is at the helm of leading them. Despite that I'm addressing this distinguished audience, the fact is that decision-making and priority setting, especially in the foreign policy realm, remain largely in the hands of men. This is especially true of non-democratic countries, which underlines the fact that democracy and gender equality correlate with one another and form a mutually strengthening relationship. I firmly believe that by taking up leadership positions in such men-dominated areas as international policy, as defense, you, female leaders, do not only realize your own potential, pave the way to others, give example and inspiration to women in non-democratic societies, but also reinforce democracy. Today, there is a stronger sense than ever that democracies have to work together more closely, as autocratic regimes do a very good job of putting their efforts together. But I would also call for more solidarity and cooperation among women. There is a widespread attitude that women tend to be more diplomatic, more inclined to resolving conflicts peacefully, perhaps even less ambitious than men. But I would argue that the defining feature of female leadership, be it at the grassroots level or in distinguished positions, is courage. We do not take up leadership positions lightly, but when we do it well, and there are no sacrifices that we are not willing to make. Take concrete examples. The democratic example of Belarus 2020 democratic movement, spearheaded by 3 women. Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya today is among us. Take Iranian protests. Young women became the symbol of it. Many sacrificed their lives for it. Take Ukrainian women. They are fighting alongside on the front line together with men. They are performing miracles of public diplomacy. They are heading civil movements. I know that we are talking on the second day of the NATO summit, and it is tempting to go into a discussion on the results of the first day. But let me say just this. Let's just make a commitment that the decisions from yesterday are just a stage in a long process, and we will double our efforts to help Ukraine, to make sure that those women who are suffering and putting enormous weight on their shoulders will get as much help as we can offer them, being in the privileged positions that we are. So I would like to take this opportunity to call us not just for a theoretical discussion on women's leadership, but for a discussion on very practical steps on how we can do more than before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And I have now the pleasure to invite Olga Stefanishyna to join us. Thank you, Olga, for finding the time to be with us. That's very important for the stairs on the other side. So for all of us, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irena. Thank you, colleagues. Many well-known faces. We've been meeting with many of you, discussing various things. Of course, here the major discussion has been taking place yesterday, and we have already seen a decision of the leaders. And I probably want to start with the words of a strong gratitude to every ally, which is everybody almost around the 32 who have been really standing strong for us. I probably want to be in a role to represent all the women in war. So we can speak, a part of my job is also covering the gender equality issues, but with the beginning of the full-scale war, it has totally different angle. Surviving the women, the families, most of the women who have been displaced, and also tackling the issues related to the war crimes against women committed by Russian army as part of the military tactics. And we have been discussing it in different circles many times. Probably, I think that the experience, the very sad experience now Ukraine has is a unique one for a largest country in Europe facing the war with hundreds and hundreds of women, men, and elderly people who faced the sexual violence. Millions of Ukrainian women who had to leave the country with their children and to be splitted with their family. Now, 500 days after the beginning of the full scale of war, we feel a lot of consequences of this horrible war directly related to women. But at the same time, we did a lot in years before the full-scale war as part of the Women, Peace and Security Resolution, the action plans, our joint work within the alliance to leave no barriers for women in the armed forces. And now we have the situation with almost 40,000 Ukrainian women serving in the armed forces, and many of them are on the senior positions, and many of them are on the front line. So we literally have no barriers for women in the armed forces, which is not the case for the, let's say, post-Soviet army format and the thinking. So, but there's like a number of things I want to bring your attention to. That with 24th of February, we have been treating this day as the day which has lifted any gender barriers, because it wasn't about whether you have this or that position. It wasn't about whether you're a woman or a man. It was whether you wake up and stand up for your duty. And I can only confirm that none of Ukrainian women had abandoned that duty. I think it's really important. And I think that when we're talking about the decisions which have been taken yesterday, we're really sorry that that's been very much behind the discussion and the wording. It wasn't that much about the substance, and what we're ending up with we're ending up with a set of conditions for Ukraine to become better than the best. I just want to bring to your attention a couple of comparisons. That we heard a lot of signals that nobody wanted to irritate Russian Federation. Nobody wanted to be clear, those who were not in a position to think so, to clear in terms of the decisions related to Ukraine's invitation to join NATO, because it might affect the future negotiations, and Ukraine might be traded in the issues related to the ending of this war with Russia. We heard many things, but it sounds very ridiculous to us, because we are talking about the country which nearly failed to reach any of the declared goals of the war. We were not believed when we were showing our resolve. We heard that Ukraine will fall within 3 days. This didn't happen. We heard that Ukraine will not be able to transform and reform itself while the war is raging on. We were not believed. But when Europe stood united for Ukraine and made a decision to grant Ukraine candidate status, you saw that we managed to run the country fully, regardless of the war, to prepare everything related to accession in the bombshells throughout the country. But you didn't believe us. And when we were saying that Russia, in fact, is really weak, that less than within 24 hours, a small group of private military officers managed to undermine the whole chain of statehood in Russian Federation and nearly find nobody in Kremlin, we were not believed. So probably it's part of the common belief and common understanding that it's better to see Russia as a huge and strong power than recognize that it's really weak. So there are many things on a discussion, and I just wanted to ask that keep on believing Ukraine. And when Ukraine says that it's really, really important that at this particular moment of time, when the hardest counteroffensive process and measures are taking place, when the people are not able to come back to their countries, where we have survived the winter without light and water, when we still opening the survivor centers around the country, helping women, men, and other people in everything they might need to survive from the war. And when we reform ourselves, when we keep the institutions running, when we keep the social, medical, everything working and operational, when we keep the banking sector running, the financial sector running generally in the country, when we reform our anti-corruption institutions and establishing the judicial institutions in the times of war and make it operational. Just believe us when we say we want the decisions that would really change the situation in Ukraine, that will really bring morale. And I'm sure that we might be sorry of some things which have not been done, of something that Ukraine expected when we will be successful in ending the war and bringing all Europe and all Ukraine to victory, when we will keep on running the country, showing that we are strong despite of everything. Probably it's also seen with the very fact that the first area of responsibility I've been covering related to women's never stopped being effective. All the infrastructure we managed to have been effective. All the women's received support in the shelters. All the women's have been standing on the squares of the European cities and the cities across Atlantic, saying they need support, they need messages from the whole world, the messages of unity. So I'm really grateful to every one of you around this table. I know that many of you step up and did the best you could. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. Ukraine is Ukraine, and us as leaders, as political officials, as women in Ukraine, as mothers, there's no negative feeling. It's just we feel that we could have done more, and it really could have helped us back in Ukraine. It was needed for us, not against Russia, not because it's just the wish list. It was so much needed. And the first information from our side we were receiving from the front line yesterday. So there's still a lot of communication, a lot of things to be done, a lot of things to be enforced in the decisions taken yesterday. And we hope this will not become another element of the historic uncertainty. You know Ukrainians, you know us. We are for certainty when it comes to the victory, when it comes to the membership of Ukraine in EU and NATO, when it comes to our territorial integrity and sovereignty, because we all know what is at stake, and it's something beyond only Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you for your words, your strength, and for leading by example every day. As a woman, as a political leader, as a colleague, as a friend, we are all with you. And let me now invite Yulia Karashvili to come to the floor.
Thank you for this opportunity. Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's very difficult for me to talk about after such an important speech, which comes directly to our hearts, because Georgia also was suffering from several wars with Russia, and we very well understand feelings, and we very well understand how important is the support for Ukraine. I had the honor to be 6 years in Civil Society Advisory Council for NATO, and I know how important is women leadership from my personal experience, because even bringing experience, one of cases when during our CSAP meeting, Georgian IDP woman was kidnapped by Russian militaries, and Deputy Secretary General Rose Gottemüller personally was involved in her saving, and it was very important for us, and it was very important for her. In 2015, after first Russian war against Ukraine, we civil society activists came together seeing how we can ensure support and solidarity with Ukrainian women and how we can support peace effort. At that time, we were thinking about peace dialogue, and we saw that complexity of problem requires involvement of whole region, of all our countries and all our powers from women from all post-Soviet countries. It was extremely important. That is how we created Women's Platform for Peace Dialogue. We had a meeting recently, and Iran was there also in Tbilisi, and there were some messages also for international actors supporting us, and I will read few. First, support solidarity actions with Ukrainian women. That could be also done not only by our solidarity, but inclusion of women activists from our countries to all strategic meetings and negotiation also at high level. And we saw today how important is women's speeches. Second, cooperate with and support civil society, women's organizations, groups, and women experts in all our countries where so-called soft power and hybrid threats are now more and more intensive, and where women's organizations and civil society needs your support and your involvement. Third, support women activists also from invisible countries, and I know that Mrs. Tikhanovskaya is here, and Belarus, and women activists, peace activists from Russia also are among these women who are providing strong support to Ukraine. Finally, I want to say a few words about my country, Georgia. Yesterday, it was very difficult for me not to hear clear messages about Georgia, and we in Georgia wait also the signals. Our society, our civil society, and all country, all population, which in 2008 clearly explained our wish. 85% of population gave clear message that we are pro-NATO and pro-European Union, and we need to keep this intention in Georgia. We need more NATO, we need more EU in our country, and especially now when more attempts are done not to give Georgia a chance to do it. This is not only because we feel that we will be more secure where we will be NATO or EU. It's because we share the same values and we feel we are Europeans. We feel that Georgia deserves status within NATO and within EU. Women, peace and security agenda is very important now as one of windows of opportunity to talk about human security and to talk about all of us. And we think that NATO can support efforts, and women leaders, women grassroots, and women in very high political positions, if we can work together for achieving a real, sustainable and fair peace in our countries, it will be our joint win. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you, Iran, who twice came to Georgia this year to support our intentions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia, for your words and for being such a strong advocate for women's rights and for the women, peace and security agenda. It's now my pleasure to invite Hanna Shelest, the head of the security programs at Ukraine Prince, to join us. And she's also, as I said, the director of security programs at the Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism and editor-in-chief at Ukrainia Analytica. Hanna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Iran. Your Excellency, dear colleagues, that is a great pleasure to see so many allies in this room, allies in NATO, and allies in our women leadership. And that is quite difficult to speak after Olga with all the emotions about what is the current affairs that all of us are sharing and emotions about the decisions. But at the same time, I would like to start from the statement that extraordinary times brings extraordinary leaders and extraordinary women. 2014 brought a lot of extraordinary Ukrainian women at the front lines, to the changes in the armed forces, to the changes in the civil society, to the changes in the politics, because that was the extraordinary times when not only the war, but the revolution of dignity, opened these opportunities. And after the 9 years of war, unfortunately, we saw the results of these extraordinary times, extraordinary leaders, extraordinary women coming to power. But at the same time, we really understood the leadership in terms of women leadership appeared not only purely about the percentage of the top positions. Especially after February 2022, we started to see extraordinary women who've been doing a very small but extraordinary reforms at the lower levels, at the level of the villages, at the level of the communities, at the level of those territories that have been occupied, where there were a lot of women in the resistance movement and leading the resistance movement against the occupants. We saw it in the occupied villages where the women heads of these communities led both the humanitarian and the resistance movement. We saw it at the front line when the volunteers, you definitely can see that that is so many female faces among those who are going to the very, very front line to save our boys. And that is so funny to hear this from the 20-year-old volunteer. I'm going there to save our boys when she's speaking about the 50-year-old soldier on the ground. But that is her leadership, how she could lead that, support that changes. Paramedics who are over there, who are changing the whole paramedic system on the front line. But at the same time, I don't want us women to be leaders only at the extraordinary times. And I would like us to be better prepared for the times when the changes are needed. So when we already started speaking about the reconstruction of the country, about development of the country after the war, even that I don't like these words after the war, Russia and Japan are still in the war. So probably we need to think about the different wording for this, not to provoke the Russian Federation to continue this war as long as they would like, not as it takes for you to support Ukraine, but as they like. So definitely I would like us already to think how to include more women into the reconstruction, into the development, in the changes in the country that will lead more women to the decision-making process at all levels, not only at the levels of the statistics, but also in understanding that the gender equality and the gender agenda, it's not just about percentage or the quotas that we will have in the parliament or in the armed forces, but in the possibilities for the development. Yesterday, we talked about how to, for example, make women to stay in the armed forces. Now we have, as Olga said, the 40,000 women with around 7,000 at the officers and senior positions in the armed forces of Ukraine. Are we sure that we can have at least part of them still being in the armed forces if tomorrow we suddenly have a peace? How many of them would decide to return back and would like to be the leaders in the armed forces only during the extraordinary times of the war and crisis? Will we be able to have the same women being able to go to the politics or to the local governance or to the other positions? These questions are still open because of the conditions. They can be good at the legislation level, but for me, always the question is how to transform these conditions in the legislation, in the development aid for Ukraine, to the reality on the ground. And that's why I will never stay between you and your coffee, because my coffee is getting cold as well. But I would like us just to call all of us to think how to be the leaders, not only at the extraordinary times, but how to create sustainable conditions to women during the war or after the war, not only in Ukraine, but in many countries, including the NATO allies countries, because I heard it from a lot of countries in the region as well, to be sustainable leaders in all those spheres where we occupy our positions. Thank you. And thank you for all the support for Ukraine within these years.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you for this message that you gave. It's really saying that it's not in the extraordinary circumstance in the summit. This is what I say every day at the office. It's important. I wanted to have this space, and I will promote and have to protect it, as I said. But it's every day that we need to continue our work, and this is what we are trying to do also at NATO, at our part, because otherwise, you know, it's easier to do this when there are the special moments, but this is really the leadership on every day. Some housekeeping now. I will invite you to continue to enjoy the breakfast and to have the discussion and conversation after at the table. We have, I know the session starts at 9. We will have 20 minutes, about 20 minutes to discuss, but we can stay then I will conclude, but then if you want to stay a little bit longer, the room is here for us and we can continue, but then feel free after, the conclusion to leave for your official commitments. Thank you.